Chapter 1.
Yard sale of the unforgiven. The morning after the funeral felt like tepid water, neither hot enough to cleanse nor cold enough to wake anyone up. The convent lawn had been divided into sections with handwritten poster board signs, pillow shams, kitchen, books, oddity, and then, off to the side, near the old sap tree that split lightning in 1987, a folding table with a sign in mint green marker, Germaine. The sisters said it softly when they walked past, as if the name itself might cause a nosebleed. There were his boots, still caked faintly with horse manure from some long-forgotten escapade, a leather jacket that smelled faintly of freshly cut grass with wild onion memories, and something darker whale blood and catfish come from that disastrous stint at the meat plant. A treadmill he'd sworn he would use, a desktop computer with a hidden microphone duct-taped underneath, a box labeled private that no one dared open until Clotilde did, bravely stepping forward like a soldier crossing saloon doors into a duel. Inside, a diary. Pandemonium doesn't always sound like screaming. Sometimes it's just quiet time collapsing. The first confession came from Dorothea. She picked up a pillow sham, embroidered with roses, and said she'd known about the crack things before anyone else. She had found the pipe wrapped in a bubblegum wrapper behind the watchtower on the rooftop. She said she thought it was a phase, like his obsession with Switzerland or cockfighting, or that yellow car he tried to fix with Windex. She had believed in blissful innocence far too long. Gumbo stood near the umbrella, Stan Germain's ridiculous collection of them, including one shaped like the Statue of Liberty, nipples exaggerated for no apparent reason, and began uncontrollable crying. Hunger pangs twisted through her, not for food, but for time. She confessed she had once driven him to the crosstown bus stop after an argument about fireflight and whether Christian rock had lost its edge. She had left him there, under the blinking watchtower clock, and never apologized. Clotilde found a box labeled outlandish that contained, among other things, a loofah, leather wallpaper samples, and items best described as misguided attempts at reinvention desktop novelties no one needed to analyze too closely. She closed the lid gently and said nothing. Her silence was its own confession. Meanwhile, Halapitanasha sat on the convent steps, hands folded over her pregnant belly. She wore a mink-colored shawl. Despite the heat, she listened. She was not blind. Not anymore, in the way that mattered. She watched everything from the side unseen. Chaos was not at the yard sale. Chaos was in his room across town, door locked, mandolin balanced against his chest like a fragile animal. His fingers moved at an alarming speed, kilowatts of effort. He had been practicing until his lashes trembled and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth in concentration. He played until flea bites on his ankles went unnoticed. He played until the sound became something feral and holy. There is a difference between learning an instrument and attempting to master it as if it might reverse death. Professor Voss had once told him music could open examination doors no one else could see. Professor Brigsby had called that romantic nonsense. Chaos had chosen to believe both. Back at the convent, Erica hovered near the 1957 Chevy Fairlane parked by the ravine at the edge of the property. She traced its chrome with a cloth dipped in tepid water and confessed she had once planted sapphires in Germain's coat lining to test his honesty. He never found them, or if he did, he never said. Ralph the parrot sat on the banister like a green gargoyle. Confess, confess, he squawked, then softer, mint green. Champagne, bliss. Even the bird understood the gravity. Loon wandered through the book section and found a Braille manual Germain had purchased when Halapitanasha first arrived at the blind school. He had tried, in his clumsy way, to learn her world. That revelation rippled through the crowd like a kite catching wind. Merrick unearthed a box of Sierra hiking boots and muttered that Germain had once sworn he would move to Oregon and disappear into woodlands where no one knew his name. He said ugliness hides best in quiet places, Merrick whispered. The side unseen was always where he operated. By noon, the yard smelled of horse manure and mint lemonade. Champagne bottles donated, anonymously popped open in brittle celebration of survival. No one called it that, but that's what it was. Dorothea suddenly turned toward Halapitanasha. You knew, she said. Halapitanasha did not flinch. I know many things. Her voice carried the softness of sap and the sharpness of broken glass. Across town, chaos struck a chord so violent the string snapped, whipping across his knuckles. Blood surfaced in a thin line. He stared at it, fascinated. Outside his window, a kite tangled in power lines near the watchtower downtown. Somewhere, a hidden microphone crackled to life. Somewhere else, in Times Square, a billboard flickered and died. Connections were forming, not logical ones, energetic ones. Back at the convent, Clotilde lifted Germain's diary and read aloud a passage about a rooftop in Switzerland and a woman who cried uncontrollably under a watchtower while he pretended to be comatose just to see who would stay. Silence fell like a saloon door swinging shut. Gumbo stepped forward and picked up the diary. We sell the objects, she said. We keep the truth. Halapitanasha rose slowly, one hand on her belly. Across town, chaos tuned the mandolin again, fingers moving faster than before. The melody shifted, no longer frantic, but calculating. Something about it felt like wind gathering behind a storm front. The yard sale continued, but the air had changed. Confessions do that. They strip the mink and leave the skin. They peel back wallpaper. They expose the hidden microphone under the desk. By late afternoon, the table labeled Germain was nearly empty, except for the treadmill. No one wanted the treadmill. It hummed faintly on its own as the sun dipped behind the sap tree, and somewhere in the distance, a rooftop door creaked open. Chapter 2. The hay bale, the malt shop, and the bird who knew too much. By the time the treadmill finally stopped humming on its own, the convent had already begun rearranging itself around absence. Grief is not a whole. It is a rearrangement of furniture in the dark. Cato had taken over the small recording studio in the converted carriage house. She stood in front of a vintage microphone, headset slightly crooked, pink and white shirt tucked into high-waisted trousers, like she was preparing for a commitment ceremony with the past. Sean hovered nearby, with the patience of a carpenter measuring twice before cutting once. He adjusted the pedestal fan so it didn't rattle like dinosaur bones in a marshland. The comeback album was nearly finished. She had titled it Ancient Blessings/Ancient Curse. The cover art still drying on an easel-featured angel wings, hovering over a suitcase left beside a street sign pointing nowhere. In the corner, in delicate quill pen lettering, the words, Confessions on a Dance Floor. She said it was ironic. She said it was reclamation. Sean believed her. The last track needed only background harmonies. She sang about early diagnosis and second chances, about how faith could be both a rape whistle in the dark and a lantern in a whirlwind. She did not sing about Jermaine directly, but his outline hovered in every minor chord. Outside, Ralph the parrot paced along the studio windowsill. "Bentley in the marshland," he shrieked. No one reacted. "Wintergreen School, lobotomy, cat in a drawer." Sean blinked. "We should maybe start writing these down." Cato kept singing. Across town, chaos had not slept. The mandolin had become less instrument and more exorcism. His fingers flew with adrenaline that bordered on self-harm. He devoured tutorials, historical treatises, obscure Appalachian tuning methods. He practiced until his ears rang like a funhouse bell. His fingertips were blistered raw. Cotton swabs, dotted with antiseptic, littered the desk beside a half-eaten German chocolate cake someone had dropped off during the yard sale. He refused to eat it. He played through hunger, through Oreos gone stale, through bowls of grits untouched. When the string snapped this time, he didn't flinch. He simply replaced it and continued. There is obsession, and then there is transformation masquerading as obsession. Dorothea found him on the back porch at dawn, still playing, eyes wild, like a boy who'd discovered dinosaur bones in the backyard and decided he alone could reconstruct the entire creature. "You can't lobotomize grief with a mandolin," she said quietly. He didn't answer. Later that afternoon, the bizarre incident at the malt shop unfolded. The entire town had gathered there out of habit more than appetite. The malt shop still had the same black and white tile floor and a tire swing out back, for reasons no one could explain. Teenagers in pantaloons for a themed fundraiser ran plates of catfish and milkshakes to elderly men arguing about jazzercise versus jazz music, as if those were opposing political parties. Chaos arrived, mandolins strapped across his back like a relic. Cato and Sean came in moments later, flushed from the studio, ears still humming. Ralph, inexplicably, had followed. And then it happened. A spilled milkshake vanilla with chocolate drizzle slid off the counter in slow motion. It hit the floor with operatic drama. Chaos stepped backward to avoid it, collided with a tricycle someone had parked near the door, and fell against the jukebox. The jukebox crackled. Instead of the expected old jazz tune from New Orleans, it played Cato's unreleased demo. No one knew how it got there. Her voice filled the malt shop roar. Luminous, unpolished. Silence swallowed the room. Then Ralph screamed, clear as a church bell. Jermaine knew. Bentley, marshland, lobster. Everyone froze. The jukebox clicked off. Gumbo, who had been quietly stirring her milkshake, whispered, "What did Jermaine know?" Ralph puffed up his feathers like a zebra poncho caught in wind. In the marshland, behind the convent, bumper sticker on the Bentley, ancient curse, ancient blessing. The malt shop erupted in arguments. Professor Voss insisted birds could mimic, but not deduce. Professor Brigsby countered that mimicry itself was a form of deduction. A man at the counter muttered something about borderline personality disorder and projection. Someone else brought up CPS, for reasons that made no sense. Pandemonium tasted like artificial strawberry syrup. Chaos stood very still, because he knew something about a Bentley. Weeks before Jermaine died, he had asked Chaos to drive with him out past the cattails, beyond the old hayfields, into the marshland where leeches clung to ankles and cattails swayed like gossiping women. They had found a rusting Bentley half submerged in mud, a bumper sticker peeling off the back. Ancient curse, ancient blessing. Jermaine had laughed. Everything is both, he had said. Chaos had thought it was metaphor. Now he wasn't sure. That evening, unable to bear the tension, Chaos carried his mandolin out to the hayfield behind the convent. The sun bled orange into the horizon. Puppies barked at nothing. A tailgate party rumbled faintly in the distance. Someone grilling catfish over open flame, the scent of marshland thick in the air. He climbed onto the tallest hay bale. The world looked different from elevation. Smaller, manageable. He began to play. Not frantically this time. Not like a boy chasing adrenaline. He played slowly, intentionally, each note deliberate, like stepping stones across spilled milk. Halfway through the melody, the wind shifted. He swore he saw Germaine sitting at the edge of the ravine in penny loafers and a straw hat, pantaloons absurdly out of era, freckled chest exposed to the dusk, holding a lobster like it was a sacred relic. It was not a hallucination in the clinical sense. It was something stranger. The hay bale trembled beneath him. From somewhere deep in the marshland came the faint metallic clang of a suitcase snapping shut. Chaos kept playing. Below him, Cato stood with Sean, listening. She had come to the field after finishing the final mix of her album. The mastering engineer had sent a message. "We're done." She felt it in her bones. She was going back to the studio lights, back to stages, back to Christian contemporary charts where faith was packaged in 3-minute crescendos and sold like craft therapy for the soul. Sean slipped his hand into hers. "We'll get married before the tour," he said softly. She nodded. Ralph landed on the hay bale beside Chaos, claws digging into straw. "Confession," he declared. Hidden microphone in the marshland. Wintergreen school tobacco in the suitcase. Lobotomy in the ledger. Chaos faltered. "What ledger?" Dorothea called from below. Ralph tilted his head. Under the hay. Silence. Chaos slowly set down the mandolin and began pulling apart the bale. Straw flew everywhere, sticking to sweat and spilled tears. At the center, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small metal box. Inside, a ledger written in Germaine's tight script. References to the marshland, to the Bentley, to donations from Wintergreen School, to something called Project I Rock, to a mysterious early diagnosis no one had shared. And at the bottom of one page, in ink that looked almost fresh, "Tell Chaos the instrument is the key." The wind stopped. Even the tailgate party seemed to pause mid-laughter. Cato looked up at the hay bale, eyes shining not with blissful innocence, but with something earned and scarred and resilient. Chaos picked up the mandolin again. This time, when he played, it didn't sound like obsession. It sounded like inheritance. Chapter 3. Fault lines and first singles. The song hit on a Tuesday. No warning, no polite knock. It detonated. Cato's first single ancient blessing shot. Up the Christian contemporary charts, like a volcano remembering. It had a job to do. Radio stations from New Orleans to small desert towns she'd never heard of were spinning it every hour. People posted videos of themselves crying in their cars. Someone in Switzerland covered it on mandolin and tagged her in a message that read, "Your song saved my quiet time." She watched the numbers rise on her desktop like a blood test she was afraid to read. Streams climbing, downloads climbing, invitations piling up. The comeback was no longer hypothetical. It was a black tie affair with candied yams and bacon bits and photographers asking her how it felt to rise from the ashes. She did not tell them that ashes are still bone. She called chaos. He was in Dorothea's kitchen, eating Cheerios straight from the box, Mandelin leaning against a wicker patio furniture chair, as if it had grown tired too. Gumbo stood at the stove stirring applesauce into gelatin, for reasons no one fully understood. Dorothea was folding a patchwork quilt that had survived 3 marriages and 1 near fire. "You need a band," Chaos said, before she could speak. "I need you," she replied. The silence on the other end cracked like a fault line. He knew. Of course he knew. They all knew. The secret had lived between them for years, like a manatee in a shallow river massive, slow, undeniable. Cato was his birth mother. Dorothea and Gumbo had raised him, fierce and imperfect and unshakable. It had always been a circumstance, more than a scandal. No one used words like octoroon or negras anymore, but history had left its fingerprints on all of them. Lines blurred, blood braided, love rearranged. "You want me in the band?" he asked. "I want the instrument to be the key," she said. He closed his eyes. Across town, Halapitanasha sat on the edge of her bed in Sapphire's long johns, hands folded over the small swell of her stomach. She had taken 3 tests. She didn't need a 4th. The pink line was as real as gravity. Pregnancy has a way of turning joy into quicksand. She had imagined stability, quiet time, mango smoothies on a wicker patio. Instead, she saw stages and tours and chaos vanishing into whirlwinds of applause. She pictured groupies in leather pants and Dolce and Amp Gabbana sunglasses. She imagined aggravation curdling into fury. She told herself she trusted him. Trust is not the same as calm. Meanwhile, Sean began acting like a man who had swallowed alphabet soup and found prophecy in the letters. He forgot small things at first. His keys, his watch, a conversation about a meeting at the university. Then he forgot bigger things. He drove to the zoo and stood staring at penguins for 2 hours, convinced they were trying to spell something out in gyration patterns. He called Cato from the parking lot and whispered, "There's a fault line under the call center." "What?" she said. "The building. It hums." She thought it was metaphor. It wasn't. Cloud, now officially manager of community engagement at the convent's call center, had begun noticing strange anomalies. The headsets crackled with static that sounded almost like whispering. Employees reported hearing someone reciting horoscopes over the line. One caller claimed he'd been offered shillings instead of refunds. A young rep named Youngblood swore he saw scuff marks appear on the cubicle walls overnight, as if someone had dragged a matchbox card dipped in ink across the paint. Cloud tried to keep morale high. She brought in fruitcake and romaine lettuce salads. She instituted mandatory quiet time between shifts. She installed a new space heater after the old one began blasting cold air like it had been possessed by a tango dancer with a grudge. Then the blood test envelopes arrived. No return address. Inside each envelope, a single sheet of paper with an X-ray image of what looked like a brow ridge and the word Circumstein typed beneath it. No one knew what that meant. Professor Voss insisted it was a prank. Professor Brigsby muttered something about ancient curses resurfacing. Someone mentioned X-lax in the break room as a possible explanation for mass hysteria, which made no sense but did produce a small, necessary laugh. Back at the convent, Dorothea, Clotilde, and Gumbo descended into the secret room. They had not opened it since Germain's ledger had surfaced. The air smelled faintly of whiskey and old leather. The magic mirror hung crooked on the stone wall, framed by cracked Velcro strips someone had once used to secure microphones during confessionals. Dorothea lit the lantern. Clotilde closed the heavy door. Gumbo hummed something low and mournful, like quarter horses restless in a storm. "Show us what we're missing," Dorothea whispered. The glass rippled. At first it reflected only their tired faces. Then, slowly, a shimmer, a shift, Conception appeared. Her afro glistened like a constellation against velvet. She wore a simple white blouse and leather pants, as if she were about to attend a black tie affair in another dimension. Her eyes held both survival and remorse, revenge and consolable mercy. "You waited too long," she said. "For what?" Clotilde asked. "For the call center to become what it was built to be." "And what is that?" "A watchtower." The word hung heavy. Images flickered across the mirror's surface. The call center building split open like a volcano in cross-section. Beneath it, tunnels, wires, a hidden microphone array running beneath the marshland. Voices recorded for years, confessions archived, secrets monetized. Germaine's handwriting scrolled across the glass. Circumstein wasn't a word. It was an acronym. C.I.R.C.U.M.S.T.A. Cloud's initials were embedded in it. Dorothea felt whiplash. "Why?" Gumbo breathed. "Because revenge," Conception said softly, "rarely announces itself as revenge. It calls itself protection." The mirror went dark. Upstairs, Chaos arrived at Cato's studio for rehearsal. He stepped into the room and felt the ground tilt. She stood there radiant, not in blissful innocence, but in something harder. The single had made her a phoenix, whether she liked it or not. She handed him a chart. "We start rehearsals tomorrow," she said. "Tour in 3 months. And Sean?" A flicker crossed her face. "He's tired." They began to play. Their harmonies braided like patchwork, mandolin threading through piano lines, something ancient and new at once. It was not just music. It was inheritance rearranged into sound. Halapitanasha watched from the doorway, hand on her stomach. The baby fluttered. She told herself it was gas. Across town, at the call center, the headsets began to hum again. Not static this time, singing. Cato's single, but reversed. Cloud stood alone in the fluorescent light, staring at the scuff marks spreading along the wall like a fault line. She whispered into her headset, "Who's there?" The reply came clear as a bitch slap. "Watch." And somewhere, deep beneath the building, something shifted in the dark, patient as quicksand, waiting for the next note to fall. Chapter 4. The Courtyard of Water and Fire. Success did not arrive politely. It came hobnobbing. Cato found herself shaking hands in backstage corridors with men who smelled faintly of spilled coffee and ambition. Indie Christian labels flew her to conferences where waterfalls cascaded behind LED crosses, and executives spoke in phrases like faith vertical integration, as if salvation had a quarterly earnings report. Her single stayed in the top 10. Her second single debuted at number 4. There were blackouts at Shoza stage lights, cutting suddenly to dark mid-chorus followed by dramatic returns of illumination that made audiences weep. At first she thought it was theatrics. Then she realized no one in production had programmed them. Divine timing. One promoter said with a grin too wide to trust. Chaos had joined the band officially. Mandolins slung low, hair pulled back. He played like a man exercising a childhood. They were good together, too good. The harmonies felt less rehearsed than remembered. On stage, The crowd swayed, hands raised like marigolds thirsty for something more than water. Halapitanasha watched from side stage, hand on her stomach. Morning sickness had turned into something bittersweet. She was learning to swallow fear, the way some people swallow pills without water. Backstage one night in Nashville, after a show that ended in a standing ovation and a spontaneous faith-healing meeting in the courtyard, a woman approached Cato. She was elegant in a way that suggested old money and newer secrets. Greasy gloves peeked from the pocket of her tailored blazer, as if she'd been repairing engines before slipping into this role. "I represent the courtyard," she said. "What courtyard?" Cato asked. "The one behind the industry." The woman handed her a card. No logo, no address, only a symbol, a sword piercing a watermelon. Chaos saw it over her shoulder and felt his pulse spike. The next invitation arrived, disguised as a brunch. Indoor swimming pool, white robes, soft music, people floating on waterbeds beneath skylights, where astronomy projections shimmered constellations mapped over verses from scripture. They called it a deeper alignment. They spoke of mourning as a necessary shedding, of shedding as limb removals not literal. They assured them with serene smiles, but metaphorical amputations of doubt, autonomy, messy history. Cato felt the air thin. Chaos noticed the repetition, the same phrases, the same cadence. He had heard it before. Brainwashing has a rhythm, a hum, a lullaby with sharp edges. As a child, he had spent 2 summers at a spiritual leadership camp run by a man who quoted Captain Kangaroo 1 minute and Revelation the next. They had taken the kids into the woods, made them sit in silence until the silence cracked. They had whispered about speed limits for sin, about hiding under a bridge from secular floods. He remembered the alternator on the old 1998 Pontiac Sunfire that transported them there, failing halfway down a dirt road. He remembered coolant spilling like vomit onto gravel. He remembered being told it was a test from God. The courtyard felt like that, polished, professional, smiling. But underneath, root rot. The first true sign came during a balcony reflection session. Cato stood overlooking the indoor pool. A glass of wine trembled in her hand. A woman beside her spoke softly about surrender. "You can't water the marigolds if you're still clinging to the weeds," the woman said. "What weeds?" Cato asked. "Your son." The word landed like shattered glass. Chaos, meanwhile, was downstairs listening to a man explain the necessity of selective blackout, therapy-temporary sensory deprivation, to help artists achieve spiritual clarity. "We remove the noise," the man said. "We remove the limb that offends." Chaos's vision tunneled. This wasn't metaphor, not entirely. He had seen the files in the secret room, hidden microphones, archived confessions, the industry behind the industry. The courtyard was harvesting vulnerability. They didn't need captive humans in chains. They needed captive consciences. That same night, back at the convent, something urgent bloomed. Clotilde discovered water pooling in the courtyard garden. At first, she thought it was overwatering. Then she saw the source. The old well had begun to bubble, not with water, with paper. Pages surfaced one by one like pale fish. Pages from Germain's ledger. Pages that had never been in the box under the hay bale. Dorothea fished them out with trembling hands. Names, dates, transactions linked to the courtyard. Donations rerouted through Shell Ministries. A note scribbled in the margin. They call it faith alignment. It's panty rubbing for the soul, Gumbo muttered. Well, that's blunt. Then the well coughed up something heavier. A small metal device. A transmitter. Cloud's call center was not the only listening post. The convent had been wired. Inside the call center, Cloud stared at her monitors as calls routed themselves, lines opening without dialing, voices whispering scripture backward, the word alignment repeating until it sounded like a line meant. Youngblood ripped off his headset. "It's in the walls," he said. Sean stood in the doorway, pale. He had followed a hunch after his zoo epiphany. He had traced wiring beneath the building. He had found a secondary power grid siphoning energy. The alternator metaphor wasn't a metaphor, he whispered. Back at the poolside brunch, the leader of the courtyard, who finally introduced himself as Reverend Levy, invited Cato and Chaos into a private room. White walls, no windows. "Your success," Levi said gently, "is not accidental. We have been watering you for years." "Watering?" Chaos repeated. "Platforming, protecting, steering." "Steering toward what?" Cato asked. Levi smiled. "Purity." Chaos stepped forward. "You mean control?" Levi's expression did not change. "You've already benefited from our protection. Blackouts at key emotional moments. Media suppression of certain family details." Halapitanasha's name hung unspoken. Cato felt the floor tilt. "You're saying you orchestrated this?" "We steward gifts," Levi replied. "And occasionally we prune." "Prune what?" Chaos asked. "Distractions." In that moment, something in Cato snapped cleanly into focus. She had thought success was a waterfall, natural, unstoppable. It was irrigation, designed, engineered. She set the wineglass down carefully so it would not spill. "We're done," she said. Levi's eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "No one leaves the courtyard," he said softly. "Not once the covenant is sealed." "We never signed anything," Chaos shot back. Levi gestured to the ceiling. "You performed." Outside, thunder rolled. Back at the convent, the well overflowed. Water and pages and old secrets flooding the courtyard. Dorothea stared at the transmitter in her hand. "They've been listening since Germain," she said. Clotilde nodded slowly. "And now they're watering something else." The marigolds bent under the sudden weight of rain. In the distance, beneath a highway overpass, a 1998 Pontiac Sunfire sat abandoned, coolant long dried, speed limit sign half torn from the pole beside it. Sometimes cults don't look like robes and chanting. Sometimes they look like record deals and indoor swimming pools. And as Cato and Chaos walked out of the courtyard building into the storm, lightning flashing like a sword across the sky, they both understood. This wasn't about fame. It was about ownership, and someone believed they owned the story. Chapter 5. The Horse Who Came Back. Trouble never arrives alone. It brings a friend and a folding chair. Halapitanasha's pregnancy shifted from delicate to dangerous in the span of one afternoon. It started with dizziness, a pinprick behind her eyes, then a sharp folding pain low in her abdomen that bent her in half like a crash test dummy mid-impact. Chaos caught her before she hit the floor. The emergency room drapes were the color of diluted calla lilies. Machines hummed with antiseptic indifference. The doctor spoke in soft tones about monitoring and possible complications. Words like "not less" and "not more than" were repeated, as if language itself were a fragile thing. Cato stood by the vending snack machine, staring at a row of Hershey's Kisses. She hadn't eaten since morning. Sugar addiction clawed at her nerves. She fed quarters into the slot and watched the metal spiral turn. Clatter. Nothing fell. She hit the glass with a deadpan look that said she would not cry in public. Chaos stepped out of the exam room. "She's stable," he said. Stable. It was a word usually reserved for horses, as if summoned by linguistic irony. An eye returned that evening. The small magical horse appeared in the convent courtyard at dusk, mane flecked with what looked like frost from some distant tundra. She had been visiting her family in a place Dorothea insisted was adjacent to the Antarctic ice wall, which everyone else chose not to unpack. An eye exhaled once. The air shifted. The marigolds straightened. The lingering sense of surveillance seemed to thin, as if some exhaust system in the sky had switched on and begun siphoning out poison. "She's back," Gumbo whispered. Anai stepped forward and pressed her forehead gently to Halapitanash's stomach. The courtyard filled with a low echonaut sound exactly, more like the memory of waterfalls heard through stone. Halapitanash's breath steadied, the pain eased, not erased, but held. Healing, in Anai's vocabulary, was never theatrical. It was incremental, a greenhouse effect for the soul. Inside, Cato felt something else click into place. The courtyard had cultivated her career like a carefully arranged fashion show. They had been watering and pruning, but Anai's return suggested a different axis of power won older, less corporate, less imperial. There are forces that manipulate, and there are forces that mend. Meanwhile, at the museum, Professor Voss was hunched over a glass case that had not been opened since 1978. The stolen statue had finally resurfaced. It had been found wedged inside a septic tank behind a shuttered motel named the Knoll. No one knew how it got there. The motel's owner insisted the only recent guest was a traveling taquito vendor with a tortoise in a tracksuit. Merrick believed none of that. Lune adjusted her glasses and stared at the artifact. It was small, bronze, depicting a horse not quite anatomically correct, slightly outlandish. Its entrails carved into spirals along its flank. "It's not just decorative," Lune murmured. Voss nodded. "It's a conduit." They had already run a preliminary examination. Under ultraviolet light Windex wiped carefully from the surface, the statue revealed faint Civil War-era photos etched into its base. Images of prisoners. Candelabra. A cave expedition led by a man with Caesar's haircut and a cigarette still burning between his fingers, though no one else appeared in the room. Merrick frowned. "Imperialism disguised as archaeology," he said. "They looted half the world and called it enlightenment." Lune pointed to a series of scratches along the underside. "Handwriting analyst says it's the same script as Germain's ledger." Voss felt his pulse thud in his ears. Germain again. They rolled out the old 10-type newspaper stand microfilm and scanned back issues for mentions of the statue. One headline surfaced from 1943. "Local museum acquires horse figure donation anonymous." Below the article was a photograph of the donor, Reverend Levy. Younger, smiling, the same deadpan look. Back at the convent, Cloud was on the phone with the Geek Squad because the call center's servers had begun emitting a high, rhythmic ding-dong every 11 minutes. The tech on the other end suggested earwax in the headset jacks. "It's not earwax," Cloud said evenly. Sean sat beside her, staring at schematics. He had traced hidden copper wiring beneath both the call center and the convent. Stolen copper, rerouted lines. The museum appeared on the map like a third node. A triangle, 3 points, he whispered. Convent, call center, museum. Fox, greenhouse, high life, victory. Youngblood muttered from the break room, reading random words off a scrap of paper found taped inside a wall panel. What does that mean? Cloud asked. Could be a code, could be nonsense, could be crimes of the heart, he shrugged. At the hospital, Halapitanasha slept at last. Chaos sat beside her, holding her hand. Cato stood at the window watching June bugs thud against the glass. I won't let them take this, Chaos said quietly. Take what? She asked. Family. She nodded. Down in the courtyard, an eye pawed the ground. The soil cracked. Something metallic glinted beneath the dirt. Dorothea knelt and brushed away earth. Another device, smaller than the transmitter from the well. This one hummed. At the museum, Voss lifted the statue carefully. A thin seam ran along its belly. Open it, Merrick said. Voss hesitated only a moment before prying the seam apart. Inside was not a relic. It was modern, a microdrive. Loon slid it into her laptop. The screen flickered. A single video file loaded. The timestamp read, tomorrow. The image resolved slowly. It showed the convent courtyard, an eye standing in the center, and a figure emerging from the shadows behind her, holding something long and metallic. The video cut to black. In the hospital room, Halapitanasha stirred suddenly and gasped, clutching her stomach. The monitors spiked. Chaos shot to his feet. Back at the convent, the humming beneath the soil intensified. And at the museum, as the lights overhead flickered and the hum of the ventilation system deepened into something like a growl, Voss realized the statue had not been hidden. It had been planted. The screen blinked once more. New text appeared. Alignment Phase 2 initiated. Then the power went out. Chapter 6. Tightrope weather. The parrot did not clear his throat. He simply tilted his green head, blinked twice, and said to Cato, never mistake ascending for arriving. Lewis and Clark reached the Pacific and still had to walk back. Cato stared at him. He pecked once at the edge of her press kit, scattering glossy photos like fallen leaves. Curiosity is holy, he continued, but fascination is a tightrope. Don't practice without a net. Then he went back to chewing on a Valentine's basket ribbon, as if he hadn't just dropped a proverb heavy enough to dent the floor. Cato laughed, but it wasn't carefree. It had edges, because she had been thinking about Levy again, not in devotion, in intrigue. There was something in the way he spoke measured, ascending and descending in tone like a sitter, bending notes into something hypnotic. She told herself she was studying him, that understanding the enemy required proximity, but proximity has gravity. Meanwhile, at the malt shop, gravity turned into impact. Halapitanasha stood behind the counter, morning attire still rumpled from a night without sleep. The doctor had prescribed prednisone to stabilize inflammation, and it made her pulse race like a roller coaster stuck halfway up the incline. Chaos stormed in, carrying a plastic bag of brown rice and lunch meat like it was evidence in a trial. You weren't answering your cell phone, he said. I was working, she replied. You shouldn't be working, and you shouldn't be deciding that for me. The words began small, pebbles. Then someone threw a lead pipe into the pond. You think I don't see what's happening? Chaos snapped. You think I don't know they're circling? You think I don't? She shot back. You think I'm made of glass? A glass syrup canister tipped. Ricochet. It shattered against the floor. The malt shop descended into disarray. Teenagers froze mid-hash brown bite. A mother clutching a toddler stepped back, as if she'd wandered into a crack house, instead of a place that sold milkshakes named Bliss and Nirvana. You're pushing me away, Chaos said, voice cracking. You won't let me help. You're suffocating me, Halapitanasha replied. I am not your misery project. That landed. He stepped closer. Too close. A chair scraped. A metal drainage dish clanged to the floor. Erica moved first. She slipped between them, like someone used to breaking up bar fights and church potlucks alike. Back up, she said sharply. Sean followed, tool belt still hanging from his waist, from repairing the exhaust system out back. Chaos, he warned. Not here. But chaos was unraveling. He had grown up with shackles disguised as guidance. He knew what it felt like to lose control. And now, with the pregnancy fragile and the courtyard whispering in the dark, he felt like he was standing at a boat ramp, watching his life drift out without him. I won't let you turn this into a suicide by cop situation, Erica hissed when he shoved a counter in frustration, sending napkin holders flying. The word cop hung in the air like a storm cloud. Halapitanasha pushed him back. He stumbled. Pratfalls are funny in cartoons. In real life, they crack ribs. He hit the counter hard. Something in him snapped not bone, but restraint. He grabbed her wrist. Not violently, but wrong. Sean stepped forward and pried Chaos's hand away. You're done, Sean said. Chaos shoved him. Sean shoved back. The sound of a body hitting tile is not cinematic. It's dull, final. Someone called 911. The police arrived fast. Windstorm sirens cutting through the late afternoon like a moonbeam sliced thin. Chaos stood there, breathing hard, syrup on his shoes. Graffiti scratched into the counter from years of bored teenagers, carving initials like descendants trying to prove existence. The officer read badge, number 74,216, as if it was scripture. Fur-lined handcuffs clicked around Chaos's wrists. The detail felt obscene. Halapitanasha burst into tears. I didn't want this, she whispered. The officer led him out, past the ochre basket by the fryer and the drainage dish still wobbling on the floor. Outside, someone recorded on their cell phone. Inside, the malt shop looked like a pressure cooker that had finally blown its lid. Tables overturned. A shattered candelabra from a themed Valentine's event lying in pieces. Milkshake machines hissing like angry hamsters. Later, Prudence from the insurance office walked through with a clipboard and a clear view of the damage. Structural, she muttered. The malt shop would close for repairs. Across town, Dorothea, Gumbo, and Clotilde felt the tremor before they heard about the arrest. The well in the courtyard had gone still, too still. The humming device beneath the soil had shifted frequency. Not louder, sharper. Gumbo tapped it with a screwdriver from his rotor-rooter kit. The sound that came back wasn't mechanical. It was layered. Voices, fragments, the coroner's findings, alignment, mystery meat, bribes. Clotilde went pale. This isn't surveillance, she said softly. It's rehearsal. Dorothea nodded. They're staging. She had found new footprints by the greenhouse that morning. Deep, booted, not belonging to anyone who lived there. And something else. Clay statues arranged in a circle behind the shed. Each one shaped like a small horse. And I refused to step near them. Back at the station, Chaos sat alone in a holding cell. The fluorescent lights hummed like insects. He stared at his reflection in the metal toilet, distorted. Someone that looks like a monkey, but not in a racial way, just the strange evolutionary mirror of bone and shadow, dreadlocks tangled, eyes too wide. He whispered, "I'm not a monster." The word echoed. In another part of town, Cato sat across from Levi in a private dining room lined with conch shells and framed photographs of missionaries in kimono standing beside villages that looked suspiciously staged. "This is unfortunate," Levi said gently. "These domestic disturbances, they can derail momentum." Cato's jaw tightened. "You knew," she said. "I know patterns," he replied. "You said you pruned distractions." He smiled faintly. "You're ascending, Cato. Don't let descending elements pull you down." Her heart thudded. For a flicker of a second, she felt the pull. Not devotion, power. The kind that whispers, "You could rise above this. You could leave the wreckage behind." Outside, a windstorm picked up dust from the boat ramp by the river and carried it through town. At the convent, an eye stood rigid. Nostrils flared. The clay statues cracked, one by one. Inside each was not stone, but bone. And tucked inside the hollow chest of the largest statue was a small plastic bag. Inside the bag, a badge. Dorothea's breath caught. "This isn't random," she said. Gumbo looked toward the road, where sirens had passed hours earlier. "It's not just cult," he muttered. "It's network." And in the holding cell, as Chaos lowered his head into his hands, he felt something colder than fear. He felt orchestration, like he had stepped exactly where someone had placed the footprint. The tightrope was no longer metaphor. It was strung across the whole town, and someone was shaking it. Chapter 7. Granite and Smoke. Truth has a smell. It smells like an old building with granite floors and air that never quite learned how to circulate. It smells like paper and mildew and secrets that have been sitting too long. Cato discovered Sean's betrayal in a place like that. Not metaphorically, literally. The museum's archives were adjacent to the West Winger, forgotten corridor, where donation records were stored in beige folders, stacked inside very dark brown cabinets. She had gone looking for documentation on the courtyard's early funding patterns. She found something else. A receipt, a hotel, Galveston, Texas. 2 names, Sean and Erica. Castle Delivery Inn, 3 nights. The date matched the emergency dispatch training conference Sean had sworn he attended. Cato stared at the paper until the words blurred. Plantation pregnancies. That phrase flickered through her mind for no logical reason. Generations of women carrying burdens planted by other people's decisions. She felt the weight of inheritance pressing on her ribs. She didn't cry. She walked. Granite floor echoing under her boots. Down the hall, she turned a corner and stopped cold. In the main exhibit hall, someone had arranged a levitation display. Not sanctioned, not scheduled. A small bronze horse like the one Voss had opened hovered 6 inches above a glass display counter. No wires, no visible support, just there, floating. A group of college students stood in a semicircle, whispering. One girl blinked rapidly, fluttering eyelids, as if trying to wake from a dream. Another boy was salivating slightly, eyes fixed on the artifact with religious hunger. The security guard stood nearby with a dead expression, flatlining calm. Cato stepped forward. The horse dropped, clanged against the granite. The students blinked, as if nothing had happened. "What did you just see?" she demanded. They exchanged looks. "A static exhibit," one said. They walked away. Cato's pulse hammered. Somewhere in town, something was bending perception. Meanwhile, at the jail, Chaos was released on bail, thanks to Erica, who showed up in a beige jogging suit and a look that could slice steel. She didn't speak during the ride back. He didn't either. Silence can be disturbing in a car. It presses against the windshield like an incubus, attacks something unseen, trying to suffocate breath from lungs. "You should have let me fall," he said finally. Erica kept her eyes on the road. "Don't beg for martyrdom," she replied. "It's not satisfying." He glanced at her. "You paid?" "Yeah." "Why?" She hesitated. Because Sean was unraveling her trust like thread from a sweater. Because she had found the love note, tucked in his jacket pocket, the night before, written in his careful handwriting, analyst-worthy script, addressed to Cato months ago, promising loyalty while already drifting. Because she had been the secret. Because she was tired of being adjacent behavior in someone else's moral collapse. "I needed to feel like I chose something," she said quietly. He understood that. Later that week, Cato confronted Sean in the convent courtyard. "And I watched from the shade of the greenhouse." "You lied," she said simply. Sean didn't deny it. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "It always happens," she replied. "That's what makes it mean." He reached for her. She stepped back. "It was a one-night stand," he insisted. "Then why Galveston 3 times? He had no answer. Behind them, Dorothea and Gumbo watched from the porch, tension thick as humidity. The warnings had grown louder. The humming devices had synchronized. The clay statues had cracked further, revealing small prayer chains coiled inside like metal serpents. That night, something stranger happened. Cato walked into a small restaurant downtown, brick walls, figs and goat cheese on the menu, soft jazz playing too loud. The moment she stepped through the door, every single person in the room turned and smiled, not casually, in unison. 40 faces, smiling. No one spoke. A man in all black, with black sunglasses, sat on a park bench outside, visible through the window, cigarette burning down to the filter. Beside him, a woman in a floppy hat adjusted the brim. They didn't move. They simply watched. Inside, the hostess approached Cato slowly. "Welcome back," she said. "I've never been here," Cato replied. The hostess's smile did not falter. "You're always here." Cato felt her breath shorten. A prayer blanket hung over a chair in the corner. A maypole decoration twisted from the ceiling in the color scheme of beige and very dark brown. Ribbons tangled like veins. She backed toward the door. The smiles remained. Perfect. Teeth too white. Outside, the man in black exhaled smoke in a long stream. "You're early," he said to the woman beside him. She nodded. "Or she's right on time." They stood as Cato stepped out. The restaurant behind her erupted into normalcy, forks clinking, conversation resuming, no synchronized anything. She turned back. Through the glass, no one looked at her. Not one. At the convent that same night, Halapitanasha woke screaming. Chaos, who had been sleeping on the couch since the fight, ran to her. Her body arched, gasping, flatlining on the monitor they had borrowed from a nurse friend just in case. Anai burst into the room uninvited. Halapitanasha's eyelids fluttered violently. "I saw him," she whispered. "Who?" Chaos asked. "The man in black." Her pulse spiked, then dipped, flatlined. Chaos froze. "Call emergency dispatch," he shouted. Erica grabbed the phone. Before she could dial, Anai pressed her forehead to Halipitanash's chest. The room vibrated. The prayer chain on the bedside table snapped. Somewhere across town, in the museum, the levitating horse rose again. And in an old smelling building near the docks of Galveston, Texas, a meeting was taking place. Reverend Levy stood at the head of a long table carved from dark wood. Around him sat figures in muted beige and brown. The man in black removed his sunglasses. "She's destabilizing faster than expected," he said. Levi folded his hands. "Good," he replied softly. Disturbance precedes devotion. Back in the bedroom, Halipitanash's heart monitor beeped again. Weak, but present. Chaos collapsed to his knees beside the bed. Erica stood frozen. Outside, the wind lifted dust into a small spiral like a maypole without ribbons. And in the courtyard, one of the remaining clay statues split fully open. Inside was not bone, not metal, but a folded photograph. Kaito, standing in that restaurant, smiling, in perfect unison with everyone else. Chapter 8. The song in the wall. Strange doesn't knock, it seeps. It slithers under doors and sits quietly in the corner until you mistake it for furniture. The call center began whispering first. Cloud noticed it during a routine audit. Headset cords, coiled neatly, notepad margins filled with doodles of cherries, and little yardsticks drawn by board operators. The computers flickered for half seconds at a time, screens going black before flashing back to life with minor distortions. VIN numbers scrambled, caller ID reversed themselves. An aquarium screensaver on one monitor filled with fish that seemed to swim backward. Glitch, someone said, but glitches don't hum in harmony. By midweek, the hum from beneath the floorboards synchronized with the convent's pipes next door. Nuns reported headaches. One described hearing the Pointer Sisters faintly through the walls, though no radio was on. Another claimed her rosary beads felt warm in her hands, like they'd been resting near a machine gun barrel. The priest noticed. He noticed everything. He walked the granite corridor between call center and convent in polished shoes, carved wood crucifix swinging against his chest. His expression stayed neutral. Blind eye, blindfold, blind obedience. But his jaw tightened. He knew that frequency. He had heard it once before, decades ago in a different diocese where sketchy behavior had been disguised as revival. Clotilde knew too. She kept quiet, because knowing isn't the same as being able to stop it. Gumbo began using a cane that week. His knee had been deteriorating for years, cartilage worn thin as old Archie comics left in the sun. He hated the cane. It made him feel withering, made him feel like a rabbit hole was opening under him, and he was the last to notice. One afternoon in Baton Rouge, while picking up specialized wiring components for Sean, Gumbo stopped by a roadside fruit stand. He leaned the cane against his hip. He never saw the man approach. It happened fast. A shove. The cane yanked from his hand. A crack across his shoulder. Another across his back. His own cane used against him like a broom handle. In a drunken brawl, fueled by moonshine and something sharper myth, maybe, judging by the twitch in the attacker's jaw. Gumbo fell, granite sidewalk scraping his palm. The man struck him again before disappearing into traffic. No robbery, no words, just impact. Gumbo's injuries were minor bruises, a split lip, vomit on the curb, from shock, but something inside him rattled loose. Back at the convent, Dorothea's fury was biblical. "Coward," she hissed. No one knew who did it, but someone wanted him shaken, and he was. That night, the call center lights flickered again. Cloud walked the perimeter with a yardstick, tapping wall panels, listening for hollow spaces. One section near the shared wall with the convent sounded different. Sean pried it open. Inside, carved wood slats, arranged in a lattice. Behind them, a cavity, not empty. Wires, canisters, a small speaker emitting the low hum, and something else. A carved wooden figurine shaped like a little league player. Midfield hockey swing, wrong sport, wrong form, but deliberate. "This isn't random," Cloud murmured. As they dismantled part of the false cavity, the humming spiked. Next door, Sister Prudence, bedridden with persistent sores, no ointment seemed to heal, sat upright suddenly. Her eyes fluttered. She whispered, "It's descending." In the chapel, two younger nuns began moving in unison without realizing it. Sock puppets on invisible hands, slight swaying, slight synchronized breathing. The priest stepped into the doorway. He felt the shift. He said nothing. Later, Clotilde locked herself in the secret room. The magic mirror waited. Its surface shimmered like an aquarium at midnight. She pressed her palm to the glass. "Scott," she whispered. For a long moment, nothing. Then the surface rippled. Scott appeared, not fully, just his outline, dreadlocks faintly visible, eyes bright. He didn't speak at first. He hummed, a low, layered tone, one note bending into another. It vibrated in her ribcage. It felt like descending into a cavern and ascending again without moving. The hum shifted into melody. No words, just resonance. The carved wood panels in the call center began to crack. The speaker inside the wall sputtered. Scott's image flickered. "Rabbit hole goes both ways," he finally said. "Don't chase it. Collapse it." The mirror dimmed. Clotilde exhaled. Meanwhile, Cato sat alone in her apartment, staring at the photograph Dorothea had shown her, the one of her smiling in the restaurant. She didn't remember smiling, didn't remember standing like that. Her mind felt like an aquarium someone had shaken. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, just a VIN number, and beneath it, a single line. "We see the form you're taking." Across town, chaos walked past the malt shop, ruins windows boarded. Graffiti sprayed overnight across the plywood. One phrase repeated in black paint. "Depravity descends." He ran his fingers across the letters. Behind him, a man stood at a bus stop, wearing a onesie patterned with cherries. He watched too long. Chaos turned. The man smiled, not wide, just enough. Back at the convent, Sister Prudence began laughing in her bed. Soft at first, then louder. She sat upright and pointed toward the shared wall. "Glory hole," she whispered. No one understood what she meant, but in the call center, one of the dismantled panels revealed a circular cutout between the buildings. Old, sealed, forgotten. A literal aperture connecting two worlds. The priest stood alone in the chapel that night. He held the carved wood crucifix tightly. He knew what it meant. He also knew why he had turned a blind eye. Some forces, he believed, were tests. But tests can become collaborations if you stare too long. Outside, wind rattled the windows. In the secret room, the magic mirror flickered once more on its own. Scott's hum echoed faintly, without his image present. And beneath the convent floor, deeper than the false walls, something metallic shifted position. like a chamber being loaded, not a machine gun. Something older, something patient. The hum did not stop. It deepened. Chapter 9. Reset the fault line. There are moments when a town stops pretending. The fog rolled in first, thick, low. A foggy morning that swallowed the convent, the call center, the boarded malt shop, the greenhouse, everything reduced to silhouette and breath. Inside the convent, the tremors began at 6:12 a.m. Not metaphorical tremors, actual. Cups rattled, lamps flickered. Slamming doors shut on their own down the granite corridor like invisible hands were practicing percussion. One window shattered outward, glass spraying into the courtyard where Anai reared and stamped. Earthquake, maybe, but the seismograph downtown recorded nothing. The shaking was local, personal. In the infirmary, Halapitanasha lay on bed rest, her body tight with cramps that moved through her like electric current. Lama's breathing came back to her in broken fragments. Inhale, exhale. The monitor beside her flickered. The Roku screen mounted in the corner blinked on by itself, cycling from a cooking channel to a documentary about the Olympics. A clip of Bruce Jenner now. Caitlin played mid-transition speech about identity and reconstruction, rebuilding, restoring, resetting. The screen cut to static. Chaos stood at the bedside, hands shaking. We need the hospital. We are not going back there, she whispered. They don't understand what this is. Her eyelids fluttered. An eye pressed against the door. Across the courtyard, in the call center, the false wall cavity began emitting a new sound, not humming, crackling. Hot rails of energy streaked along the exposed wires, sparks dancing like tiny vamps at a midnight camp. Cloud yanked the power. It didn't matter. The amps in the backup system kicked on by themselves. Someone or something was rerouting power. Sean ran in from the street, breathless. There's an orphan on the steps, he said. What? A kid. Rat-tail haircut. Rose gold cell phone case. Just sitting there, eating marshmallows. Cloud stared at him. You're joking. I'm not. Outside, on the convent steps, a boy about 8 sat cross-legged. He wore a mohair sweater, too warm for the weather. He was calmly toasting marshmallows over nothing, just holding them up, and they browned as if a flame were present. Dorothea approached slowly. Where are your parents? He smiled. They're in the crack house, he said cheerfully. Gumbo gripped his repaired cane tighter. He had not told anyone how deeply the beating had unsettled him. The bruise on his shoulder bloomed purple beneath his shirt. Who sent you? Dorothea asked. The boy shrugged. I like theater, he replied. Fairy tale theater. This is Act 3. Behind them, another tremor. A light fixture fell. Inside the infirmary, Halapitanasha arched again. Flatline. Not full, not yet, but dipping. Chaos looked at the crucifix on the wall. He grabbed it, not reverent, desperate. Do something, he muttered to it, and for a second he felt something answer. Not God, pressure, like an incipient botfly burrowing under skin. Across town, Cato stood in her kitchen staring at a piece of chocolate cake she hadn't touched. She felt hollow and constipated, emotionally blocked, clogged with betrayal. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, coordinates, and a single word, perch. She grabbed her Arag-top jacket and left. At the museum, Voss and Loon were already there. The levitating horse had begun to rise and fall rhythmically, like breath. Voss muttered, This isn't a glitch, it's a performance. Loon held a certificate they'd found in the archives dated 1978, a restoration grant for adjacent behavioral studies funded by a shell corporation tied to Galveston Properties. They looked at her. Bad, she continued. Observation point. Someone's watching from elevation. As if on cue, the bronze horse shot upward and slammed into the ceiling, denting laminate panels before crashing back down. Outside, the fog thickened. In the convent courtyard, the orphan boy stood. He pointed at Gumbo. "You shouldn't have come back from Baton Rouge," he said softly. Gumbo felt ice in his spine. Dorothea stepped in front of him. "You leave," she said, voice low. The boy tilted his head. "You all think this is spiritual," he said. "It's structural." He held up his marshmallow stick. It wasn't wood. It was a thin metal rod, like a probe. Inside the infirmary, the monitor screamed. "Flatline," Chaos shouted. Erica burst through the door, breathless from the tour bus that had dropped her back early after the strange man cancelled appearances due to atmospheric interference. She grabbed Halapitanasha's hand. "Come back," she whispered. For a moment, everything stopped. No hum, no tremor, no crackle. Then, a voice, not from a person, from the corner of the room. A cameo by the talking kidney stone. Yes, the one that had once tormented Sean during his worst night. It rolled out from beneath the bed, tiny and calcified, and said in a gravelly tone, "Pressure creates form." Chaos blinked. "I'm hallucinating." "Probably," the kidney stone replied. "But listen anyway." It vibrated. The crucifix in Chaos's hand heated. A pulse moved through the convent, through the false wall, through the museum, through the greenhouse. Scott's humming cut in, faint but precise, like Wu-Tang Clan versus layered over Gregorian chantun expected, rhythmic, undeniable. The fog outside began to lift. The orphan boy froze mid-step. His form shimmered. For a second, his silhouette split like astral projection misfiring. Behind him stood the man in black, and behind him, Levi, watching, calculating. The tremor subsided. Halapitanasha gasped. Air rushed back into her lungs. The monitor resumed its rhythm. Not strong, but alive. The kidney stone rolled back under the bed. "Reset," it muttered. Outside, the orphan vanished. Only a charred marshmallow remained on the granite step. Gumbo exhaled. Dorothea turned toward the convent and said, "This isn't possession." Clotilde stepped beside her. "No," she replied quietly. "It's renovation." Across town, at the boarded malt shop, the graffiti had changed. Where depravity descends once screamed in black paint, new letters now dripped in red. Rebuild. And in the museum, as the bronze horse finally settled still on the display counter, Cato felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not devotion. Resolve. Restoring wasn't going to be enough. Rebuilding wouldn't cut it. This would require resetting the fault line entirely. And fault lines don't move gently. They rupture. The town had just taken its first controlled breath. The next one would not be controlled at all. Chapter 10. The White Room. Names are anchors or cages. Cato stood in the courtyard beneath the cracked gazebo lattice and said it clearly, so no one could pretend they misheard her. "My name is Cora." No trembling, no explanation, just a reclaiming. Dorothea watched with a look that understood what synergy feels like when it isn't corporate nonsense, but soul alignment when the moving parts of a life click into place with an audible internal yes. Chaos stood beside her, quiet. The malt shop reconstruction had begun. Plywood coming down in pieces, dynamic newspaper clippings, already spinning the narrative. Local business rebuilds after violence. Community stronger than ever. Cash cow optimism. Sean read one of those clippings that morning. Then someone stabbed him. It happened in broad daylight. Not in an alley, not in a crack house. On the grassy knoll behind the museum, near the old gazebo that once hosted Little League award ceremonies and awkward wedding receptions where peach pie was served on paper plates. He was arguing on his cell phone about permits, about renovations, about money and stinginess, and why synergy always seemed to cost more than it promised. The assailant stepped from behind a hedge. No mask, no dramatic speech, just a blade. 2 stab wounds, precise. One below the ribs, one shallow across the shoulder. Sean gasped for breath, falling backward into damp grass, staring up at the sky, as if waiting for Romeo to step out with Cupid's arrow and call it poetic instead of clinical. The attacker vanished. Sean lived, barely. At the hospital, the 911 operator who took the call had hot pink eyes, not metaphorically, not figuratively, hot pink. The nurse blinked when she saw her through the glass partition. The operator stared at the monitor showing Sean's vitals and smiled in a way that hypnotized whoever looked too long. "Stable," she said. Her voice sounded like a waffle iron snapping shut. No one questioned her. Meanwhile, Cora felt it before the ambulance sirens reached her. A snap, like the missing piece of a diary sliding into place. She turned to Chaos. "It's starting," she said. He nodded, not afraid. Ready. That night, they disappeared. Not dramatically. No note pinned to a mirror. No tearful farewell. Just absence. The call center logs show both their phones powered down at 11:47 p.m. The last camera footage catches them walking past the old grass. Hut plantation ruins at the edge of town what locals jokingly call the Palace Castle, an abandoned estate half swallowed by vines. After that, nothing. But there were dreams. People reported them. The priest dreamed of a horned infant on fire crawling across the altar, not crying, just staring. Erica dreamed she was trapped in a white room with no doors, lucid enough to know she was dreaming, pounding on invisible walls, while hearing Chaos's voice echoing from a shaft above her. Gumbo dreamed he was a witness, peering through a keyhole and a peephole at once, seeing the entire property from impossible angles: the convent, the call center, the gazebo, the grassy knoll folding inward like paper. In his dream, a horned infant stood in the center of it, flames licking upward but not consuming. He woke gasping for breath. Clotilde did not dream. She stayed awake. She spread out old newspaper clippings across the table, decades of strange events tied to this property. Fires, suicides, missing persons, a penthouse scandal in Houston tied to a donor who later became a quiet benefactor to the convent, a Houston Astros charity gala hosted at the Palace Castle in 1989, photographs with smiling faces that didn't age properly in subsequent years. She found a missing piece of a diary tucked inside a frame. Someone had hidden it there. One line stood out. "The hideout is not underground. It is between." Between what? The priest finally broke his silence. He gathered the remaining sisters in the chapel and spoke only of what Christ himself actually said about prayer. Not church tradition, not politics, just the words. "When you pray," he said quietly, Go into your room and shut the door. Do not heap up empty phrases. Pray in secret. Forgive. If you have anything against anyone, ask, seek, knock. That was it. No theatrics, no exorcisms. Just return to simplicity. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond the fog line, Cora opened her eyes in a white room. Pure, featureless. She knew she was dreaming. Lucid, she turned and saw Chaos across from her. He was touching the wall. It's not solid, he said. The wall shimmered like a screen. They pressed together. The surface broke like water. They fell, not downward, sideways, through a shaft of light that smelled faintly of peach pie and smoke. They landed in a quiet, sunny clearing in the woods. Real woods, birdsong, wind in leaves. A gazebo stood there, intact, uncracked, unpainted. In the center sat a small iron table with a waffle iron on it. Steam rose, and beside it, a figure, not Levi, not the man in black, something older, something watching. Cora felt no fear, only recognition. Back in town, Sean regained consciousness. He looked at Erica first, then Dorothea. "Where's Cato?" he whispered. Dorothea met his eyes steadily. "Her name is Cora." Sean's hand tightened weakly around the hospital sheet. Outside, the sky darkened without cloud cover. The call center hum went silent, not muted, gone, like someone had unplugged the universe. In the courtyard, Anne stood still as marble. In the distance, sirens wailed, but no one had called 911. The grassy knoll lay empty. The gazebo creaked once, and in the clearing far beyond town limits, Cora stepped toward the iron table and said calmly, "You're the missing piece." The figure smiled, and the woods inhaled.
Chapter 1. Morning arrived over the gulf like a slow-opening curtain, pink light spilling across the convent roof and the sagging fences behind the malt shop. The town always woke reluctantly, dogs barking, the smell of fried dough drifting from a bakery, the occasional pickup rattling past like an arthritic dinosaur. Life resumed whether anyone felt prepared for it or not. Chaos stood in the parking lot of Golfsad's car wash, staring at the hand-painted sign that promised finish lines so clean you'll see God in the paint. The place smelled like soap, gasoline, and wet asphalt. Buckets clanged. Water hissed through hoses. He tugged on the cheap uniform shirt they'd given him, a polyester monstrosity, the color of a sickly pineapple. Chaos had powers, weather, resonance, strange little bends in probability, but today he was simply a guy holding a sponge and a spray nozzle. A co-worker named Randy leaned against the bucket, chewing sugar wafers. "Hey, mandolin boy," Randy said with a smirk. "You gonna wash cars or just hallucinate at them?" Another guy laughed. Chaos said nothing. He had learned something important about power. The real strength sometimes lies in not using it. If he unleashed even a fraction of what simmered under his skin, these men would be blown across the lot like leaves in a hurricane. Instead, he scrubbed the townhouse sedan until the paint gleamed like ivory plaster. One of the men muttered something ugly about monkeys and monkey bars. Another laughed and flicked soap at Chaos. Chaos kept washing. In his mind, he counted the seconds like a monk repeating scripture. 2, 3. The finish line, he told himself. Every day has one. Meanwhile, across town, life moved in its own crooked patterns. Dorothea and Gumbo shuffled through the convent garden in the cool morning air. The two of them had aged into a comfortable orbit around each other like two moons that had stopped pretending they were planets. Dorothea wore a velour shawl and fanned herself dramatically, even though the weather was mild. "Gumbo," she said, peering at a calico cat perched on a picnic table. "If that animal knocks over the statue of Thomas Edison again, I swear I'm installing electric fences around historical monuments. Gumbo leaned on his cane. Dorothea, he replied, rubbing Vicks vapor rub under his nose. That statue is made of plaster and looks like a disgraced youth pastor. She considered that. Fair point. They walked slowly past rose bushes and satin ribbons tied to old fence posts from some long-forgotten convent event. Age had not dulled their weirdness. If anything, it had polished it. Elsewhere in town, Clotilde sat across from Youngblood at a picnic table behind the call center. The break room inside smelled like talcum powder, cream cheese bagels, and desperation, so they had escaped outdoors. Youngblood stirred iced coffee. Clotilde kept things carefully polite. Their friendship had become a quiet thing, balanced like a kayak gliding across calm water. You ever read the Book of Revelations? She asked. Youngblood raised an eyebrow. That's one way to spend a lunch break. She shrugged. End-of-the-world literature relaxes me. Youngblood laughed softly. Across the table, a stray peacock feather drifted down from nowhere, landing between them. Neither of them questioned it. Stranger things had happened in this town. At the malt shop, Erica wiped the counter while Ralph, the parrot, strutted along the glass display like a velvet-covered emperor of bad manners. Glazed donuts, Ralph squawked. A teenager blinked at him. Ralph leaned closer. You know what glazed donuts remind me of? Never mind or too young for that story. Erica sighed. Ralph, latex, silk, lace, the bird shouted proudly. Please stop listing fabrics. The parrot puffed up. Disgrace, disheveled, hippopotamus. Erica rubbed her temples. Sometimes she wondered if Ralph had absorbed every strange conversation ever spoken in the building like some kind of feathered tape recorder. Meanwhile, across town at the blind school, a new teacher had arrived, Mr. Haddish. He was tall, thin, and carried himself with the faintly theatrical grace of someone who had once practiced fencing or ballet. Students liked him. His voice was calm, his lessons precise. He taught tactile reading techniques and history with a peculiar enthusiasm for inventions Thomas Edison, early braille machines, historical monuments of accessibility. But something about him felt. Professor Voss had mentioned it casually to Merrick while standing beside the monkey bars in the playground courtyard. Just a feeling, Voss muttered, like happenstance wearing a disguise. Loon said nothing but watched the man carefully. And then came the moment. Late afternoon. One of the janitors, an old man named Carl, who smelled perpetually of chenille, fabric softener, returned to the classroom building to retrieve a forgotten toolbox. He walked quietly past the hallway and froze. Inside Mr. Haddish's classroom, the teacher stood alone. Carl watched as the man suddenly staggered slightly, gripping the desk. His body, Carl rubbed his eyes. It wasn't dramatic. No explosion of light. No transformation like a cheap horror movie. It was subtler, stranger. The tall man's posture softened. His frame shrunk slightly. The hair shifted. The clothes hung differently. Within seconds, standing there was not Mr. Haddish, but a young girl. She looked perhaps 13, maybe 14. She stared into the window glass as if checking her reflection. Carl felt his heart trying to escape his chest. He backed away slowly. The next morning, Mr. Haddish arrived at school exactly the same as always. Suit pressed, hair neat, voice calm, nothing unusual. Carl almost convinced himself he had imagined the whole thing. A hallucination. But that afternoon another teacher misses. Belle went back to the building after hours, and she saw it too. Mr. Haddish standing by the chalkboard. And then, again, the shift, the shrinking, the girl, Mrs. Belle gasped loudly. The girl turned toward the door. For one silent moment their eyes met. Then the girl blinked, and Mr. Haddish stood there again. Completely normal. Mrs. Belle ran. That night the town slept uneasily. Chaos scrubbed his final car under the yellow lights of the car wash. Soap slid down the meadow like melted snow. He stared at his reflection in the wet hood. Behind him, Randy laughed with the other workers. Chaos closed his eyes. The wind shifted slightly. Not a storm, just a whisper. Across town, Dorothea paused in the convent garden and looked up at the moon. Something strange is brewing, she said. Gumbo nodded slowly. Oh yeah, and somewhere in the blind school building, long after the lights went out, a shadow moved across the hallway. Small, young, and laughing very softly. Chapter 2, the next morning, unfolded with the uneasy quiet of a town that had slept poorly without quite knowing why. Chaos arrived again at the Gulf Sad's car wash, pulling on the same uniform, Sherta fabric blend of denim-colored cotton, polyester, and just enough spandex to make him feel like a reluctant gymnast. The thing clung in odd places. Randy tosti marag. Hey Mandalin boy, he said. You ever play Pac-Man? Chaos blinked. Because that's what you look like when you scrub a bumper. Just chomp, chomp, chomp. Chaos ignored him and began rinsing a pickup truck whose owner had decorated it with a Larry Bird bumper sticker and 3 cowboy boot silhouettes. Inside Chaos's mind, the mandolin hummed faintly like a sleeping insect. He tried not to listen. Across town, the blind school hummed with normalcy so aggressive it almost felt like a performance. Students tapped white canes down the hallway. Teachers carried stacks of papers and teachers' manuals. And Mr. Haddish walked calmly through it all, smiling politely, a stack of textbooks under one arm. Mrs. Bell stood waiting for him outside the classroom. She had slept maybe 2 hours. Her eyes were red with teardrops and coffee. Mr. Haddish, she said carefully, may I ask you something? He smiled. Of course. She lowered her voice. Yesterday, after class, something happened in this room. He tilted his head. Yes, changed. The smile didn't disappear, but it became smaller. Changed how? Mrs. Bell felt her pulse in her throat. I saw you turn into a girl. A silence fell over the hallway. Students passed by laughing, unaware. Mr. Haddish leaned against the doorframe thoughtfully. Mrs. Bell, he said gently, have you ever researched lucid dreaming? She blinked. Well, sometimes when people are exhausted, the mind overlays waking life with dream imagery. He spoke calmly, like a man explaining Pac-Man strategy. Stress can do remarkable things to perception. Mrs. Bell stared at him. You're saying I imagined it. I'm saying the brain is a fascinating microscope. His smile returned. Perhaps you simply need rest. He opened the classroom door. Would you like some saltine crackers? They help with drowsiness. Mrs. Bell walked away more disturbed than before. Meanwhile, the janitor Kyle was having the worst morning of his life. He had just rolled his wheelchair-bound cousin into the school office for paperwork something involving elder abuse allegations at a nursing home that required Carl's signature as a witness. Life was messy that way. Kyle shuffled toward the trash dumpster behind the building to toss out a bag of old classroom junk-broken drum set sticks, coffee clutch flyers, a stack of old Christian pop CDs someone had donated during a fundraiser. He lifted the lid and froze. Inside the dumpster was a grisly discovery. Not a body, not exactly, but something that looked disturbingly like one. It was a mannequin, except the mannequin had been dressed in someone's closed denim jacket, cotton shirt, polyester slack sand. Its face had been crudely painted to resemble Carl himself. Even the hairy legs were right. Carl dropped the bag. The mannequin sat upright in the trash like it had been waiting, and then its head turned slightly. Carl screamed so loud, a rabid dog across the alley began barking hysterically. Carl stumbled backward into a roundabout of stacked milk crates, tripped, and slammed into the pavement with a nosebleed so sudden he thought he'd been shot with dynamite. The mannequin remained in the dumpster, still. Sail. But Carl swore its eyes had moved. Elsewhere, the day took another strange turn. Clateld and Youngblood sat in the call center break room during lunch. The fluorescent lights buzzed like tired insects. They were sharing a plastic container of bean dip and cheesecake someone had left in the fridge with a note that read, "Free from the coffee clutch." Youngblood opened the newspaper to the want ad section. "Look at this," he said. "Somebody's selling a microscope for $200. Clattel leaned closer. "Why would anyone need a microscope in this town unless they're researching bacteria in the Holy Land or something. Youngblood laughed, and then the power went out. Instantly, the call center dropped into darkness. Phones died mid-ring. Computers blinked off. For a moment, the whole room felt suspended in eerie silence. Then, bang! Something crashed in the hallway. A metal chair rolled across the floor like a ghost had shoved it. Youngblood stood. "You stay here." He stepped into the corridor. Clotilde followed anyway. They reached the main call floor. Dozens of cubicles sat empty, but in the center aisle something had been placed there. A small table, cheap, fold out, with a handwritten sign taped to it, $200. On the table sat a thick, ancient-looking spell book bound with leather straps. Next to it was a board game, Scattergaris. Beside that, Farkle dice. Clotilde frowned. What in the world? Youngblood turned the page of the spellbook slowly. Symbols filled the paper, old, dense, unsettling. At the bottom of the page, someone had scribbled a note. "Capricorn is watching." Clotilde suddenly felt the room tilt. A wave of nausea rolled through her. Her vision blurred, like the hallway from The Shining stretching away forever. "Youngblood," she whispered. He looked up. Blood was dripping from her nose. Slow, dark. Youngblood grabbed her shoulders. "Clotilde," but before he could say anything else, the book snapped shut by itself. The lights flickered back on. Phones began ringing again. The table was gone. The games were gone. The spell book was gone. Nothing remained except a single saltine cracker sitting on the floor and a faint smell of trash dumpster rot drifting through the air vents. That evening, Dorothea and Gumbo sat on the convent porch, watching the sunset. Dorothea sipped tea. "Something's stirring," she said quietly. Gumbo nodded. "Feels like the beginning of a satire written by a drunk ghost." Dorothea looked toward the blind school in the distance. Or something worse. Somewhere inside the school building, Mr. Haddish stood alone in the empty classroom. He stared into the window glass. For a moment his reflection flickered. "Tall man, young girl. Tall man, girl." He smiled and whispered softly to the empty room. "Roundabout." Then he turned off the lights. Chapter 3, Horns in the Smoke. Chaos should have known better. The moment had the exact flavor of bad judgment. Incense thick in the air. A cluttered display counter at Loon and Amp. Merrick's Curiosities. And Chaos standing on a mohair sofa he absolutely was not supposed to be standing on. The sofa had been imported from somewhere vague and expensive, and Merrick had said very specifically that if Chaos put so much as a shoelace on it again, there would be consequences. Chaos, unfortunately, was not wearing shoelaces. He was wearing battered canvas shoes, the kind that looked like they'd survived 3 hurricanes and a minor electrocution. They left faint gray marks on the pale mohair as he balanced there with the focus of a man attempting something deeply stupid. "Hold the ladder steady," he muttered. "There is no ladder," Loon replied from below. "Then hold the idea of one." Chaos stretched upward toward the ceiling. A narrow wooden panel sat there, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. A small iron ring hung from it. The riddle they'd found in one of Professor Voss's crumbling almanacs had mentioned the door which adored the ceiling. Chaos wasn't convinced the grammar made sense, but the implication was clear enough. Something interesting waited above. "Don't pull that," Merrick warned, leaning on the display counter. "Last time you pulled something mysterious, we had peppermint candy raining from the ventilation system for 3 days. That was festive," Chaos said. "People thought it was a chemical attack." Chaos tugged the ring. The ceiling panel swung open with a dusty sigh. For one quiet second, nothing happened. Then a black bear burst out. It exploded downward in a frenzy of feathers and offended squawking, ricocheting off a velvet curtain and landing squarely on Merrick's shoulder before launching itself through the open front door. Chaos lost his balance. The mohair sofa slid. Loon grabbed the sofa. Merrick grabbed Chaos. All 3 of them crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, incense smoke, and mild profanity. Outside, the town emergency dispatch siren began wailing. "Please tell me," Merrick said slowly from the floor, "that the bird did not trigger something." Chaos looked up at the open ceiling hatch. Smoke was drifting out. "Define Trigger," he said. Across town, Professor Voss was having a worse evening. He was seated in the back room of the Municipal Community Outreach, building a place, decorated with motivational posters, a sugarcane arrangement someone had inexplicably brought from Louisiana, and a surfboard leaning in a corner for reasons no one remembered. Voss had come to give a lecture about local folklore. He was now trapped halfway inside a ventilation shaft. "Professor," said the cardiologist from the town clinic, who had come only for the free raisin bran muffins. "Are you—" Momentarily delayed, Voss replied, his legs dangling awkwardly over a stack of lockers. The problem had begun when Voss noticed a draft coming from the ceiling and decided it might connect to the same hidden architecture Chaos had been investigating earlier that week. He had climbed up to inspect it. Now his coat sleeve had snagged on a metal bracket, and the shaft had shifted just enough that he could neither climb forward nor slide back. "I require assistance," Voss admitted. A pit bull named Brisket sat below him, watching with patient interest. "Do you buy?" Voss asked the dog. Brisket wagged his tail. From somewhere deeper inside the shaft came a distant thump, then another. The lights flickered. "Interesting," Voss murmured. Meanwhile, the dreams had begun. All across town, people slept uneasily. They dreamed of babies with small curling horns. The babies were wrapped in blankets of fire. They did not cry. They simply stared. In one dream, a woman stood on the deck of a catamaran drifting across black water. The horned infant floated above the waves like a lantern. In another, a fisherman on a pontoon boat watched the sky split open while the child laughed. And in nearly every dream, a black bird perched nearby, silent and watchful. Back at the curio shop, the ceiling hatch had begun releasing a slow drizzle of soot. Chaos coughed. "That's probably not good," Loon said. Merrick stood and brushed feathers from his jacket. "I am calling this what it is," Merrick said. "A pursuit of catastrophe." Chaos peered into the opening again. "I think there's a room up there." "Of course there's a room up there. And I think it leads somewhere interesting." "That is exactly what I'm afraid of." From the street outside came shouting. Someone yelled about a burn victim at the docks. Someone else yelled something about a shotgun. The emergency dispatch siren grew louder. Chaos climbed back onto the sofa. Loon stared at him. "You just fell." "That was before I knew it led somewhere interesting." He hoisted himself up into the opening. For a moment, only his legs stuck out of the ceiling. "Chaos," Merrick said, voice very calm. "Yes, if something explodes again." A loud wham-bum echoed through the ceiling. Dust rained down. Chaos's head popped back through the opening. "You're not going to believe this. Try us. There's a tunnel." "To where?" Chaos wiped soot from his nose ring. "I think," he said, "it goes under the town." Merrick closed his eyes. Somewhere outside, a police cruiser skidded past. Loon exhaled slowly. "You realize," he said, "that this is exactly how every disaster starts." Chaos grinned. "That's the fun part." Later that night, at the Rusty Lantern bar, Ralph leaned against the counter delivering a furious monologue to anyone who would listen. "I don't care what anybody says," he declared. "I cannot stand Audrey Hepburn." The bartender blinked. "She was elegant." "Exactly," Ralph said. "Too elegant. Nobody wakes up that elegant." You ever seen somebody in canvas shoes at 3 a.m, eating peppermint candy and staring at a ceiling trapdoor? No, but that's real life. A man at the end of the bar muttered something about breakfast at Tiffany's. Ralph waved him off. "And another thing," Ralph continued, "warming up now. If one more person tells me elegance is attractive, I'm going to lose it. Real charisma is chaos. Real charisma is a guy falling through a ceiling hatch while holding incense and yelling about a riddle." The bartender nodded slowly. "That does sound memorable." Ralph took a drink. "And another thing," he added darkly, "any movie where the main character never once complains about exhaustion or deodorant is lying to you. Far beneath the town, in the dark tunnel Chaos had discovered, something moved. A faint glow flickered along the stone walls. The sound of distant water echoed through the passage. And somewhere deep in the shadows, a child laughed. Chapter 4. The dreams had spread. Nobody in town wanted to say it out loud at first. People mentioned it sideways, like talking about a smell nobody could quite identify. At the diner on the pier, beneath flickering neon signs, 3 fishermen compared notes over rancid coffee and a bowl of peppermint candy someone had left by the register. Every one of them had dreamed of the same thing: a baby, horns curling from its head, flames dancing across its body like birthday candles in a hurricane. One of the men claimed he heard the baby laughing. Another swore it was crying. The tar just paid his bill and left, pale as driftwood. Outside, the pier groaned under the tide, and somewhere out over the water, a black bird shrieked into the wind. Inside Town Hall, Professor Voss was already aware something was wrong. He sat on a faded mohair sofa that had absolutely no business being inside a municipal office and rubbed his eyes with the slow exhaustion of a man who had been awake too long thinking about things that did not want to be thought about. Across from him sat Loon and Merrick. The room smelled faintly of incense. Nobody admitted lighting any. "That's the 4th report," Merrick said, tapping a clipboard against the crooked display counter that once held pamphlets for community outreach programs no one ever attended. Loon leaned back in an orange chair and stared at the ceiling. "Mass dream contagion," he said. "Psychological resonance." "Or," said Voss quietly, "something else." He didn't say the word prophecy. Nobody wanted to give that idea oxygen. Meanwhile, across town, Chaos was doing what Chaos always did when the universe was quietly unraveling. He was making everything worse. He stood outside a bait shop arguing loudly with a man wearing canvas shoes, a nose ring, and a shirt that read boots on the ground since 79. The argument had started because Chaos had borrowed a pontoon boat without asking. It had escalated when the boat somehow ended up tied to a drifting catamaran full of tourists. And now emergency dispatch had 3 calls about a man water skiing behind both vessels while shouting "One bum, thank you, ma'am," at passing seagulls. Chaos insisted this was a misunderstanding. The police were less convinced. Back at the university building, Dorothea was about to discover something she would very much prefer not to know. She had come looking for Erica. Erica's office door was slightly open. Inside, the room looked normal enough. Books, papers, a stack of Harper's Bazaar magazines. No one expected Erica to read. But on the desk sat something that made Dorothea's stomach tighten. A folded object made of skin. Actual skin. It looked like a cape. A sealed skin cape, stitched with thread so fine it almost vanished in the light. Dorothea stepped closer. Something about it felt wrong. Not evil exactly, but old. Ancient in the way a fossil is ancient. On the wall above the desk hung a framed quote from Isaac Asimov. "The saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom." Dorothea stared at the cape again. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway. She closed the office door quietly and walked away. Her hands were shaking. Downstairs, in the janitor's supply room, another secret had just been discovered. Gumbo had come looking for a mop. Instead, he found the janitor sitting on the floor, surrounded by dolls, not toy dolls, handmade dolls, dozens of them, each dressed in tiny outfits, some of them placed inside a small wooden crib. The janitor was gently brushing the hair of one of them. He looked up slowly. Gumbo froze. Neither man spoke. The janitor cleared his throat. "They helped me think." Gumbo considered this for a moment. Then he shrugged. "All right." He picked up the mop and left. Some mysteries, Gumbo had decided long ago, were better left exactly where they were. Across town, Ralph was in the middle of a rant. He stood on top of a table in a bar near the pier, delivering a monologue nobody had asked for. "I'm telling you," he declared, pointing dramatically at a bewildered bartender, People worship Audrey Hepburn like she invented oxygen. But listen to me, listen. The woman made wayfish elegance into a global conspiracy. Someone coughed. Ralph ignored them. And don't get me started on these lazy lesbian stereotypes in cinema either. You know who wrote better women than half the industry? Ray Bradbury. You know why? Because he understood human beings instead of cardboard cutouts. The bartender blinked. A man in the corner muttered something about starting a pity party. Ralph slammed his glass down. Don't interrupt genius. Far away from the noise, in a small apartment filled with baby blankets and sleep-deprived silence, Jermaine Jr. stirred in his crib. The baby's eyes opened. For a moment the room seemed darker than it should be. A faint, scratching sound came from the ceiling, slow, deliberate, as if something above the apartment was trying to open a door that had been sealed a very long time. The baby stared upward, then he smiled. And somewhere in town, a dog began to howl like Toto from The Wizard of Oz had just seen something walking out of the storm. And in the quiet spaces between dreams, something ancient was beginning to wake. Chapter 5. Kites over swampland. Morning arrived sideways, not gently, not politely. It crawled into town like a raccoon that had discovered cough syrup and a philosophy degree. The sky was a fever dream of gray and copper. Thunderheads rolled over the river like slow buffalo, dragging a thunderstorm behind them that smelled faintly of swamp water and burned French bread. Chaos had not slept. He sat on the apartment floor beside Jermaine Jr.'s crib, wearing one sock, an inside-out shirt, and the expression of a man who had recently tried to argue with gravity and lost. The baby slept peacefully. Outside the cracked window, the world had gone apeshit. A string of kites tangled in telephone wires above the deserted back road behind the apartment building. Nobody knew who had flown them or why they had chosen a thunderstorm for the occasion. They twitched in the wind like nervous birds. Chaos rubbed his face. "All right," he said to the ceiling. "You win." The ceiling scratched again, not loudly, just enough to suggest that something up there had trespassed into a part of the world that did not technically belong to it. Jermaine Jr. opened one eye, then sneezed. A tiny baby sneeze. Chaos stared at him. "Bless you," he said automatically. The baby blinked like a tiny philosopher who had just discovered vital signs. Across town, the pier was chaos of a different flavor. Tourists from somewhere far too sunny were riding the cable cars down toward the waterfront like a parade of confused flamingos. The boardwalk lights flickered. The neon signs buzzed. One of them, shaped like a porcupine wearing sunglasses, had started blinking the word open and then help in alternating pulses. Nobody admitted programming that. Down the street, Loon and Merrick stood outside a diner eating raisin bran from a paper bowl because the diner had run out of spoons. "This town is deteriorating," Merrick said. Loon shrugged. It was never exactly picturesque. At that moment, a gust of wind rolled down the street and scattered dandelions across the sidewalk like tiny yellow fireworks. One of them landed in Merrick's cereal. He stared at it. Loon ate it. Meanwhile, in the university courtyard, Professor Voss was attempting something that technically counted as science, but looked suspiciously like a vision quest. He had set up 3 folding tables, a battered telescope, 2 thermometers, and a bowl of caramel corn. Nobody understood the caramel corn. "Atmospheric anomalies," he muttered, scribbling notes. Dorothea approached slowly. "You're measuring the sky with snack food. It helps with morale," Voss said. Dorothea hesitated. She was still thinking about Erica's office, about the skin cape, about the feeling that the room had briefly tilted into another century. "You ever notice," she said quietly, "how every weird thing in this town happens right after we think things are finally normal?" Voss adjusted the telescope. "That's because normal is a rumor." Meanwhile, and this was very important preparations for Sean and Cora's wedding, continued in the background, like a stubborn radio station nobody could turn off. The invitations had been printed. The church had been reserved. A local bakery had promised a cake that involved caramel frosting, edible dandelions, and a small decorative crucifix made entirely of sugar. No one knew if the wedding would actually happen, but the town kept planning it anyway, because hope, like bad wallpaper, refuses to peel off easily. Back at the marina, something extraordinary was happening. Ralph the parrot had commandeered a bar stool. He stood on one claw, puffed up like a green philosopher king, and began addressing the crowd. "Ladies and degenerates," he squawked. The bartender sighed. "Oh no." Ralph flapped his wings dramatically. "Let us discuss Annie Oakley, the patron saint of superior aim and frontier swagger." A fisherman blinked. Ralph continued. "Born Phoebe Ann Mosey, could shoot the wings of a fly while balancing on a horse. Meanwhile, you people struggle to open popsicles without requiring medical supervision." Someone laughed. Ralph strutted across the bar. "Imagine Annie Oakley today. She'd walk into Hollywood and challenge every action hero to a duel. Bang, bang, 2 shots, box office destroyed. She'd charge a gratuity just for the humiliation." He paused dramatically, then added, "And unlike certain parrots I know, she never once suffered razor burn, carpet burn, or porcupine-related incidents." Nobody asked what the porcupine incident had been. The bartender slid him a peanut. Ralph bowed. Meanwhile, Gumbo was wandering through the flea market on the edge of town. Technically, it was called the Community Outdoor Exchange. Everyone called it the flea marker because the sign had lost a letter during a fire drill 2 years ago. The stalls were full of strange objects: rusty bicycles, boxes of cassette tapes, a jar labeled swampland soil, $2, and a man selling hand-painted cartoon portraits of raccoons wearing tiny sheriff badges. Gumbo picked one up. The raccoon in the painting looked suspiciously like Chaos. Back in the apartment, Chaos finally stood up. Jermaine Jr. had begun kicking the air in tiny determined bursts, like a miniature kung fu master practicing underwater. Chaos lifted him gently. "Okay, kid," he said. Outside, thunder cracked. The kite snapped violently against the wires. The scratching in the ceiling stopped. For a moment, the entire town seemed to inhale. Chaos looked out the window. The storm clouds opened briefly, revealing a slice of sky, so bright it looked like a cartoon sun had punched a hole through the weather. "All right," he muttered, "we're doing this." He grabbed his jacket. Jermaine Jr. burped. Somewhere far off, on the river road, a truck backfired on a deserted back road, and high above the apartment building, something unseen shifted its weight in the rafters, waiting. And down by the church, a banner flapped in the rising wind. Sean and Aunt Cora wedding coming soon. Nobody could say exactly when. But the town kept reminding itself, because if a wedding could still happen here, then maybe the rest of the world hadn't completely lost its mind. Yetmish. Chapter 6. The alley behind the malt shop. The alley behind the malt shop smelled like old sugar, rainwater, and the kind of secrets that stick to brick walls long after midnight. A flickering bulb above the back door hummed beside a crooked cuckoo clock someone had nailed there years ago for reasons no one could explain. Every hour the bird popped out, screamed once like it had seen the future, and slammed itself back inside. Tonight it was quiet, too quiet. The rain had come through earlier and left the pavement slick. A long white line of chalk from an old parking boundary ran down the center of the alley, like a road nobody trusted anymore. A puddle of mud had formed near the dumpsters, reflecting the neon malt shop sign in wobbly red letters. And in that puddle, a body. Chaos didn't see it at first. He and Loon had come around the corner, arguing about something extremely important, involving gum, breath mints, and whether either one of them actually counted as dental hygiene. "You can't chew gum and call that brushing your teeth," Chaos said. "You absolutely can," Loon replied. "That's what mint flavor means." They stopped. Something about the alley felt wrong. The air had the heavy silence that sometimes follows an eruption, not a volcano, but the emotional kind. The kind that happens when something terrible has just punched a hole in the world. Chaos stepped forward slowly. Then he saw the shoes, canvas shoes, dark with rain. He looked up, and the world tilted. He whispered. Merrick lay on his back beside the dumpster, one arm crooked beneath him, like he tried to grab the air on the way down. His face was still pale under the buzzing light. His glasses were gone. 2 gunshots had ended the argument his brain was probably having with the universe. Both to the head. Loon staggered backward. No. Chaos knelt beside him. Merrick's Roman nose was unmistakable even in death. His mouth hung slightly open, the faint shadow of the cleft palate he'd always joked about visible in the crooked shape of his smile. Only now there was no smile, just silence. Behind them, footsteps. Chaos spun. At the far end of the alley, a figure had been crouching near the shadows by the trash bins. Tall, nervous, a coat the color of chartreuse that made him look like a radioactive scarecrow. Brigsby, Chaos shouted. Brigsby froze. For half a second their eyes met. Then Brigsby bolted. He vaulted a broken crate, slipped through the narrow gap between the buildings, and disappeared toward the old baseball field. Chaos chased him 2 steps before Loon grabbed his arm. Chaos, don't. Chaos stopped. His chest heaved. Brigsby was gone. The alley went quiet again. Somewhere inside the malt shop, a jukebox clicked and began playing a slow, lonely instrumental that sounded like it had been written for people who discover terrible things. Loon stared at Merrick's body. This doesn't make sense. Chaos didn't answer, because something else had just caught his attention near Merrick's hand. A smear of green, sticky, thick. Chaos touched it. Slime. Across town, trouble was already brewing at the blind school for exceptional navigation. The school sat on the hill above the river like an old brick fortress. Most nights it was peaceful. Tonight it sounded like a demolition derby. 4 four-wheelers roared across the practice yard, engines whining. Students in heavy jackets and earmuffs zigzagged across the muddy field in a game that looked suspiciously like a cross between Capture the Flag and an advanced psychological experiment. They called it white line syndrome training. No one fully understood the rules. The instructor blew a whistle. Stay on the boundary. Feel the rope. The rope marked the edge of the field. Beyond it lay a shallow trench full of wet grass and one deeply unfortunate tire swing hanging from an oak tree. One student misjudged a turn. The four-wheeler clipped the rope and launched sideways into the puddle of mud. Mud exploded everywhere. The crowd cheered. From the second-floor window, Professor Voss watched the chaos with a pair of binoculars and the notebook. Fascinating, he murmured. Dorothea stood beside him. What does this have to do with Merrick? She asked. Voss turned a page. Because 20 minutes ago, one of the students reported hearing 2 gunshots from the direction of the malt shop. Dorothea's stomach dropped. And Voss pointed toward the practice field, because immediately afterward, the slime appeared. Dorothea followed his finger. Across the muddy yard, a strange green substance had begun creeping across the grass. Slow, glossy, like something alive. Students stared around it nervously. One four-wheeler accidentally rolled through it. The slime clung to the tires and stretched behind the vehicle like taffy. Dorothea felt a cold thought settle into place. That's the same stuff I saw earlier. Voss nodded. Exactly. Back at the Marina bar, Ralph the parrot had discovered an audience. He stood on the counter beside a bowl of peanuts, puffed up like a tropical professor. Ladies and grocery shoppers, Ralph squawked. Tonight's lecture, Fruit Cups of the Modern Era. A fisherman blinked slowly. Ralph continued anyway. You've got your peach cups, your pear cups, your suspiciously translucent mixed fruit cups that nobody trusts but everybody buys. He paced dramatically. And let us not forget the sacred cereal pairings. The bartender sighed. Here we go. Ralph flapped his wings. Peach cups with raisin bran, pear cups with cornflakes, mixed fruit with Cheerios if you're feeling adventurous and emotionally stable. A woman at the bar laughed. Ralph leaned closer. However, if you're eating fruit cups with French bread, You've officially lost control of your life. He paused, then added solemnly, also avoid pairing fruit cups with porcupines. Nobody asked. Meanwhile, Chaos and Loon still stood in the alley. Rain began again, soft at first, then harder. Chaos looked down at Merrick's body. Brigsby was here, he said quietly. Loon nodded. But why? Chaos wiped the slime off his fingers on his jacket. I don't think he did this. Then who did? Chaos stared at the smear of green goo beside the body. A thought crawled slowly into his mind. Something Professor Voss had said once about unusual substances appearing after certain events. Somewhere nearby, a truck roared down the deserted back road toward the river. From the distant fairgrounds came the faint sound of a hayride tractor engine chugging along through the rain. And above the alley, in the window of the abandoned building across the street, something moved, a small shape, wrinkled, green, watching. Chaos narrowed his eyes. What the hell? The creature stepped into the light just long enough to reveal its ugly little grin. A throne. Then it vanished back into the shadows. The alley went silent again, and somewhere deep in Chapter 7, the beautiful dawn nobody ordered. Night loosened its grip on the town the way a stubborn knot finally gives up and slips apart. Morning arrived, not politely. It came in strange, crooked layers fog in the streets, orange light along the rooftops, and the uneasy feeling that the universe had stayed up all night, rearranging the furniture of reality. A beautiful dawn spread slowly over the river, and the town collectively tried to catch its breath. Chaos had not slept. He sat on the hood of Loon's truck outside the police barricade near the malt shop. 2 patrol cars idled nearby, their lights pulsing red and blue like mechanical heartbeats. The alley was taped off now. Inside that narrow space lay Merrick's body, covered in a gray sheet that fluttered slightly in the wind. Chaos rubbed his face. Head on down, Loon muttered quietly beside him. Chaos blinked. Wah, that's what my grandmother used to say when things got bad. Head on down, chin up. Chaos looked at him. That sentence makes no sense. Yeah, Loon said, but it helped. The 2 men sat quietly while the town tried to process what had happened. Death has a way of clearing the fog from a place, but in this town, it only made the fog thicker. Across town, at the church, something extraordinary was happening. A crowd had gathered inside the sanctuary. At first, they had come to pray. Then someone noticed the picture. It hung above the side ultra-faded portrait of a saint whose name no one remembered anymore. And the picture was crying, not metaphorically, actual tears, clear drops, sliding slowly down the varnished paint, collecting at the bottom of the frame and dripping onto the wood. A woman gasped. A man crossed himself. Someone whispered, "It's a prophetic revelation." Others whispered different things. A miracle, a warning, a sign outside. A group of teenagers who had been decorating the gym for a pep rally wandered in with powdered sugar still on their fingers from a booth selling funnel cake. They stared at the weeping portrait in stunned silence. One boy dropped his plate. Another whispered, "That's messed up." Meanwhile, Dorothea walked through the university courtyard, clutching a paper bag filled with fresh flowers and a box of cotton balls she had taken from the biology lab. She didn't know why. It simply felt like the right objects to carry while the universe was unraveling. The campus fountain had been shut off overnight. Someone had thrown a Tin Man costume into the water, and it now sat half-submerged like a metallic ghost waiting for directions. Dorothea shook her head. This place is losing its mind. A voice behind her answered, "Are finding it." She turned. 3 people stood beneath the old oak tree. They wore simple coats. Nothing dramatic. No robes, no masks, just ordinary clothes. And yet something about them made the air feel heavy. The tallest one stepped forward. "Dorothea," he said calmly, "we've been evaluating your consciousness for some time." She blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" The woman beside him spoke next. "There are secrets in this town that require stewardship." Dorothea stared. "You're kidding. We are a society dedicated to maintaining balance." The man continued. Dorothea laughed. Of course you are. He didn't laugh. We've watched the disturbing sights unfold. The slime, the dreams, the trolls, the death in the alley. Dorothea felt the ground tilt beneath her. And you think I'm part of this? We think, the woman said gently. You're already standing in quicksand, whether you realize it or not. Dorothea gripped the flowers tighter. What do you want? The man smiled, a heavy smile. Domination is such an ugly word, he said. I prefer guidance. At the edge of town, Professor Voss stood inside the hospital radiology lab studying a series of strange x-rays. The technician leaned against the wall, looking confused. You sure this came from a human? Voss nodded slowly. Yes. The x-ray image showed bones, normal huesos. Except for one thing. Tiny horn-like shapes were beginning to form along the skull, just like the babies in the dreams. The technician swallowed. What does that mean? Voss closed the folder. It means the dreams may not be dreams. Elsewhere, the Tau struggled to behave normally. At the diner, a waitress served po' boys to 3 construction workers who kept glancing nervously at the television news. At the mall, a Walmart employee tried to mop up a trail of neon green slime. Someone had tracked through the electronics department. The slime glowed under the lights. Neon green, neon orange. It pulsed faintly, like a living highlighter pen. A child pointed. Mommy, look. The mother grabbed his hand. Don't touch it. Down by the baseball field. Chaos ran. Not metaphorically. Actually running like the wind across the grass, chasing the only lead he had left. Brixby. Loon followed behind him, scampering through the mud and shouting unhelpful instructions. Slow down. Chaos ignored him. They cut through the outfield, past the broken bleachers, and into another narrow alleyway that smelled like spilled wine. A crate had fallen there. Earlier that morning, 2 bottles lay shattered, labels still visible. Beaujolais, Cabernet. Chaos crouched beside them. The slime was here too, thicker now, moving slowly across the pavement. Loon stared. Okay, he whispered. I officially hate everything about that. Chaos touched the edge of it with a stick. The slime recoiled slightly, like it had nares. Loon shuddered. This town used to have normal problems. Chaos stood slowly. No, he said. We just didn't see them yet. Back at the church, the crowd had grown. People stared at the crying picture with open astonishment. Some prayed. Some laughed nervously. One woman collapsed into hysteria and had to be carried outside. The tears continued to fall, drop by drop. And as the sun climbed higher into the morning sky, a beautiful dawn spread across the rooftops like spilled gold. For a moment, the town looked almost peaceful, almost ordinary. But beneath that calm surface, the strange machinery of fate had already started turning. And somewhere out there, someone was still running head on down, chin up, straight into whatever came next. Chapter 8. Details nobody was supposed to notice. Morning had settled into the town like a cautious houseguest polite. Bright, but clearly aware that something weird had happened during the night, and nobody wanted to talk about it yet. The beautiful wooden paneling on the walls of the church glowed warmly in the sunlight. The floors were polished, so smooth the light slid across them like honey over polished wood grain. Inside, wedding preparations had begun. Because the strange machinery of life has a stubborn rule. Even when the universe goes sideways, people still get married. Cora stood in the dressing room, staring at a hot pink tuxedo hanging on a hook. Tell me again why Sean thought this was a good idea, she said. Dorothea folded her arms. Because Sean believes irony is romantic. Cora groaned. The room smelled faintly of hairspray and panic. On the floor lay scattered boxes labeled false eyelashes, bouquets of fresh flowers, and the roll of decorative ribbon that had somehow wrapped itself around a volleyball net. Someone planned to string outside for the reception. The beige carpet was already littered with confetti and 2 suspicious jalapenos that no one remembered bringing. Cora exhaled slowly. Everything feels strange. Dorothea hesitated. Then she glanced toward the door and lowered her voice. You noticed too, Cora blinked. Notice what? Dorothea leaned closer. People are growing tails. Silence. Cora stared at her. That's the worst joke I've ever heard. Dorothea shook her head. I'm serious. She gently lifted the back of her blouse, just enough to reveal something small and discreet near the base of her spine. A thin tail, barely 4 inches long, moving slightly. Cora covered her mouth. Oh my God. Dorothea dropped the fabric. And apparently, we're not supposed to talk about it. Across town, Chaos sat inside the office of a pawn shop that smelled like old leather, motor oil, and regret. Behind the counter stood a large man with a beard, like a winter storm. He wore thick boots, a fair-lined jacket, and an expression of calm curiosity. His name was Nanook. He had arrived in town 2 days earlier driving a battered 1999 Cadillac DeVille, the color of melting ice. Chaos had found him by accident. Or maybe not by accident. Nanook spoke slowly. You look troubled. Chaos rubbed his eyes. People are growing tails. Nanook nodded thoughtfully. Yes. Chaos blinked. You knew about this. Nanook leaned back in his chair. Where I come from. In the north, strange things are less surprising. Chaos glanced around the shop. Mounted antlers. Fishing spears. A stack of hockey sticks beside a gleaming Stanley Cup replica someone had pawned. You're Eskimo? Chaos asked. Nanook shrugged lightly. Some say Inuit now. Chaos nodded. Right. Nanook continued calmly. Years ago, I lived in villages built from igloos. Ice and silence everywhere. Hey, when the wind blows across frozen ground, it carries stories. Chaos waited. And sometimes, Nanook said, the stories follow you south. He leaned forward. You are not the only one growing. Additions. Chaos stiffened. You too. Nanook smiled gently. Mine is larger. Chaos decided not to ask. Meanwhile, Sean stood outside the church wrestling with a ladder. Gumbo stood nearby, eating something from a paper bag that looked suspiciously like tripe. You're sure you want the ceremony out here? Gumbo asked. Sean nodded. Absolutely. He gestured proudly. The lawn stretched out behind the church. Bright green grass on the other side of the driveway. A white archway, folding chairs. A volleyball net someone insisted would add festive energy. A group of teenagers hung string lights, while bullfrogs croaked loudly from the nearby drainage pond. Romantic, Gumbo said. Sean wiped sweat from his forehead. The priest says he'll perform the service wherever we want. And Chaos is giving Cora away. Sean nodded. Yep. Gumbo chewed thoughtfully. And the baby. Sean brightened. Jermaine Jr. Yeah. Sean leaned closer. We're thinking he rides down the aisle in a little wagon. Gumbo nodded. That'll work. Then he added, as long as the kid doesn't vomit during the vows. Sean looked horrified. Don't say that. Inside the church basement, Ralph the parrot perched on a chair conducting what he called a pop quiz of cultural knowledge. 3 confused volunteers stood in front of him. Question 1, Ralph screeched. What do jalapenos, Yosemite, and a vacuum cleaner have in common? The volunteers stared blankly. Ralph flapped dramatically. Wrong. Back at the pawn shop, Chaos followed Nani down a narrow hallway. The floorboards creaked. One wall looked slightly different from the others. The wood grain shifted oddly. Nanook tapped it. Hidden door. The panel slid open. Behind it, a small room. A mattress, a coil of rope, and shelves filled with strange objects. One wall had been built recently. A false wall. Chaos pointed. What's behind that? Nanook answered offhandedly. Secrets. Chaos sighed. Of course it is. Nanook studied him carefully. You are at the center of this story now. Chaos shook his head. No thank you. Nanook ignored that. Something is changing people. Chaos nodded slowly. The slime, the dreams, the horns on the x-rays. Nanook added quietly. In the tails, Chaos rubbed his temples. So what's the plan? Nanook smiled slightly. Observe. Chaos groaned. That's not a plan. Outside, 2 teenagers ran past the pawn shop laughing. One of them tripped on the curb and nearly crashed, landed into a stack of crates. As he got up, his shirt lifted slightly. Chaos saw it. A tail. Small. curved. The boy noticed Chaos staring and quickly pulled his shirt down. "Don't tell anyone," he whispered nervously. Then he ran off. Chaos looked at Nanook. "This whole town's turning into a zoo." Nanook chuckled. "In nature, change happens quietly at first." He gestured toward the street, and then suddenly, everywhere. Later that afternoon, Cora stepped outside the church to see the finished decorations. The lawn looked beautiful. Sunlight on the chairs, flowers swaying, bullfrogs singing. Chaos stood waiting near the archway. He smiled when he saw her. "You ready?" Cora nodded. Then she looked at him carefully. Chaos shifted awkwardly. "Well," Cora raised an eyebrow. "You've got something behind your back." Chaos hesitated. Then he sighed and turned slightly. There it was, a small tail. Cora burst out laughing. Chaos groaned. "Oh, Gray." She wiped tears from her eyes. "Well," she said, "at least we match." Chaos blinked. "You too?" Cora shrugged. "Guess so." They stood there quietly in the afternoon sun, bullfrogs croaking, wedding bells waiting, and somewhere beneath the strange new rhythm of the town, something ancient stirred, something that had been watching all along. And he was very interested in weddings. Chapter 9, the day the wedding didn't happen. By late afternoon, the church lawn looked like a postcard someone had breathed life into. White folding chairs stood in neat rows across the green grass. The archway shimmered with flowers. A long table waited under a shade tent, already crowded with casseroles, funnel cakes, bowls of fruit, and something Gumbo insisted was gourmet, but suspiciously resembled leftover tripe. The beautiful wooden paneling inside the church glowed warm and honey-colored in the sunlight that spilled through tall windows. Outside, Sean adjusted the sleeves of his ridiculous hot pink tuxedo, while Chaos checked the tiny wagon meant to carry Jermaine Jr. down the aisle. The baby slept peacefully, clutching a ribbon like a king who had accidentally conquered a kingdom. Bullfrogs croaked lazily from the drainage ditch. A breeze rolled through the trees. Everything felt like the calm before something enormous and stupid. Dorothea stood near the edge of the lawn, staring toward the road. Something gnawed at her. Not a thought, a pressure. The same feeling she'd had when the crying picture first wept in the church. The same feeling she felt when the x-rays revealed those strange horns forming in newborn skulls. Patterns were clicking together, and she hated the picture they formed. Ambo wandered up beside her, carrying a bowl of jalapeno dip. "You look like someone just replaced your mattress with a cactus," Dorothea whispered quietly. "The tails." Gumbo froze. "What about them?" "They're not random." Gumbo set the bowl down slowly. "What do you mean?" Dorothea gestured toward the crowd. "Look," Chaos talking to Sean. "A teenager tying ribbons. The priest preparing his book near the archway. Not everyone has them," she said. "Only certain people." Gumbo frowned. "Yeah," Dorothea swallowed. "And every single one of them was exposed to the slime." Gumbo's stomach sank. From the mold shop alley, and the Walmart spill, and the baseball field, the realization crawled across Gumbo's face like cold water. That stuff wasn't an accident. No. Clotilde arrived at the wedding late, as usual. She burst from her car carrying a tray of pastries and yelling instructions no one had requested. "Someone move that chair. The symmetry is wrong." She stopped suddenly. Something in the air felt. The wind had died. The bullfrogs had gone silent, and the ground beneath their feet began to hum. At first it sounded like a distant truck engine. Then the sound deepened. A vibration moved through the soil, under the chairs, under the archway, under the church itself. Chaos looked down. "Did you feel that?" The humming grew louder. A low zap-like pulse rippled through the ground. Then the grass split open, not violently. More like a zipper slowly sliding apart. A long seam opened across the lawn, and from beneath the earth rose something no one had expected. Metal, smooth, antsy. A structure pushed upward from underground like a submarine surfacing after centuries. The crowd gasped. Clotilde shrieked. "What in the name of polite society is that?" The object rose higher until the entire shape became visible. A circular chamber, covered in glowing panels, pipes, glass tubes filled with that same glowing slime. Dorothea stared in horror. Oh no, inside the chamber, rows of incubation pods lined the walls, each one labeled, each one filled with shimmering fluid, each one designed for something very specific: human evolution, acceleration, the slime, the dreams, the horns, the tails. It had all been part of one long experiment, a quiet program running beneath the town for decades. Dorothea's voice shook. This place, it's a laboratory. Ambo steered, but who built it? A slow clap answered. Everyone turned. Standing calmly near the edge of the lawn was Professor Voss. He stepped forward with quiet, smug satisfaction. The man who had studied the X-rays, the man everyone trusted, the man who had helped investigate the mystery. His smile was thin. I was wondering how long it would take someone to figure it out. Chaos felt the blood drain from his face. You... Voss nodded pleasantly. Yes. Clotilde's eyes went wide with panic. You monster. Voss ignored her. For decades, he said, gesturing to the structure, this town has hosted a genetic research project. Dorothea's voice trembled. The slime, adaptive catalyst, Voss said proudly. The dreams, neurological preparation. The tales, first visible stage of morphological evolution. Gumbo blinked slowly. You turned the whole town into lab rats. Voss smiled. No, into prototypes. Sean ripped off his bow tie. You ruined my wedding. Voss shrugged. History rarely schedules itself around ceremonies. Chaos stepped forward. What are you trying to make? Voss gestured to the pods. Humans capable of surviving the future. Adaptable spines, enhanced instincts, environmental resilience. Dorothea whispered. You're creating a new species, not creating. Voss corrected. Unlocking. Then something unexpected happened. Nanook stepped forward from the crowd. Calm, quiet. His breath slow like Arctic wind. You are wrong, he told Voss. Voss tilted his head. And who might you be? Nanook simply said, someone who has seen this before. He gestured toward the chamber. This machine is very old. Voss frowned. That's impossible. Nanook shook his head. Long ago people built things like this and buried them because they realized something. Voss crossed his arms. And what was that? Nanook smiled faintly. Humans are already strange enough. At that exact moment, the machine made a noise, a deep mechanical groan. The panels flickered. The slime tubes rattled. Then the entire structure shuddered. Dorothea looked at the control panel. The system is collapsing. Voss turned pale. That shouldn't happen. Nanook nodded calmly. It happens when secrets stay buried too long. The ground trembled again. With a final metallic scream, the chamber sank back into the earth. The lawn slowly closed over it, grass reconnecting like nothing had ever happened. The hum vanished. Silence returned. Everyone stood there stunned. The wedding chairs crooked. The archway tilted. The sun drifting toward evening. Sean finally spoke. So, wedding postponed. Chaos nodded. Yeah. Gumbo sighed. Clotilde fanned herself dramatically. Dorothea stared at the quiet lawn where the machine had been. Voss slipped away unnoticed into the crowd, smiling, because he knew something the others did not. The experiment hadn't ended. It had simply moved on. Later that evening, Chaos sat on the church steps holding Germain Jr. The baby giggled and tugged his shirt. Chaos looked down at the tiny tail peeking from the baby's blanket. As the future's weird kid. Germain burbled happily. The stars began appearing overhead. Somewhere, a bullfrog croaked again. Life resumed its strange rhythm. The wedding would happen eventually. The town would keep breathing. And beneath the ordinary noise of existence, something new had quietly begun. Not a catastrophe, not a miracle. Just the next chapter of a very peculiar evolution.